Chapter 8:13 Birth of the Dark Sword's Eye. The morning in the demon's grave was gloomy as ever. A tinge of light lit the horizon that looked like a red canvas. With newly found vigor, the monsters roared. Molten lava flowed out from the top, lighting the mountain with its golden light. Coupled with the morning light, the realm looked brighter than earlier. In the distance, the bats littered the red sky. Strangely, more and more bats appeared on the horizon for some reason. On the other hand, Michael and Vidora resumed their journey toward the top. The higher Michael climbed, the fewer hook points he came across. He hoped to reach the top using only the grappling hook. But on the contrary, he had to use his hands to climb more than the grappling hook. Without looking down, Michael climbed up the mountain. His entire body was drenched in sweat. "Careful," Sarba warned Michael. Despite the dry air and the heat, the mountain surface looked slimy for some reason. Grabbing the holds turned out to be a pain because of the slimy surface. Still, Michael carefully held onto the edges and moved up on the mountain. He didn't rush climbing up. Instead, he took every step with caution. Several hours passed in a blink of an eye. He had to use healing potions to keep his hands and legs from going numb. Almost 10 hours later, the top of the mountain became close to Michael. With a final use of his grappling hook, Michael climbed up to the top. After lifting his body to the top, Michael just collapsed to the ground and breathed heavily. Michael's chest rose and fell at regular intervals. Meanwhile, Vidora flew away from Michael and saw a giant hole filled with molten lava. The mountain was like a giant well, except it had lava instead of water. Just looking down into the hole made Sarba's head spin. They quickly flew back to Michael and landed on his chest. Just as they were about to ask Michael to stand up, the mountain rumbled. Soon, the lava erupted for a moment, throwing a splash of lava outside. Michael immediately kicked up to his feet. Molten lava glistened on the ground like a gooey orange cake. Ayag was tempted to have a taste, but she was not that stupid. Michael slowly walked to the edge and looked down at the boiling lava down. He felt like he was staring at the sun itself. The molten lava inside the mountain was too bright and hot enough to melt down a fusion stage warrior like a wax statue. The volcano remained dormant, hiding the terror and destruction within. Once it erupts, he could imagine how much damage it would do. Fortunately, the demon's grave was void of population. "Hey, look, your robes," Sarba's shout broke Michael's concentration. He quickly turned around and saw his long coat was on fire due to the extreme heat in the air. Crimson-red flames engulfed his long coat as Michael immediately took it off and threw it on the floor. In a blink of an eye, the flames reduced his once stylish black long coat to nothing but ash. The long coat had been with him since his first day in this world. Vidora saw Michael squat before the pile of ash and grab a handful. "Rest in peace, old friend," said Michael. Even though it was just a lifeless piece of clothing, Michael shared a connection with it. After all, he bought it from the system when he first came to this world. At that moment, he felt like a piece of him had left him. But he could only sigh and buy another one from the system store. For now, he chose not to, as the heat would only burn it down again. At least his trousers escaped the heat, but Michael was prepared to lose them too. Once again, Michael walked to the edge to look around the mountain. According to the system, the required items to forge his dark swords were somewhere inside the mountain. Dark volcanic ash hindered Michael's eyesight. To remedy the situation, Michael simply raised his hand as a powerful gust of wind cleared the area around him of the ash. As a result, he was able to see the mountain beneath him more clearly. Finally, Michael saw the narrow pathways around the crater. These pathways were just wide enough for one man to walk. But any misstep would lead straight into the boiling volcano. Instead of dropping down the pathways, Michael flicked his wrist as a drone materialized above him. However, the drone shattered into pieces due to the intense heat. Michael hoped it wouldn't happen, but it did. The only option Michael had was personally walking the narrow pathway. Seeing no point in lingering around, Michael slowly climbed down toward the pathway. He pushed his body against the wall and slowly walked down. Step by step, Michael walked the narrow path. If I trip down, grab me by my collar and give me a second to use the grappling hook, Michael said to Vidora. Obviously, Vidroa couldn't fly away carrying Michael because then gravity would pull both of them down. But if Vidora grabbed him by his collar, it would give him a second to react and use either the teleportation scroll or the grappling hook to escape the well of molten lava beneath him. System, can you pinpoint the location? Michael asked the system. How about the host paying the system 100,000 badass points to show you the entrance? Do it, Michael immediately agreed to the deal. Normally, Michael would have preferred finding the entrance by himself, but the situation dictated otherwise. Any misstep would be life-threatening. So he was not in the situation to bitch with the system. After the system took the agreed amount, a glow appeared in the corner of Michael's sight. A part of the walls on the other side was glowing. Try not to fall down, host, said the system. Michael sensed a bit of sick humor in its voice. If the crater containing the lava was a circle, Michael had to go to the opposite end to reach the glow. The narrow path was already crumbling down bits and pieces at a time. But Michael surprised the system by climbing back to the top. Vidora frowned as they had no idea why Michael suddenly climbed back to the top. What happened? You got cold feet? Ayag tilted her head. What are you up to, host? The system also seemed surprised and questioned Michael. Using my brain, that's all, Michael thought. Then, he started to walk around the crater to reach the glow instead of the narrow path. The mountain's top was broader and more stable compared to the narrow path. So why did Michael have to risk himself walking the narrow path when he had a much better alternative? Except for the strong wind that tried to push him down, the current path had no downsides at all. Vidora followed behind Michael, having no idea what had just happened. Where are you going? Asked Sarba. Well, see, Michael mumbled as he continued on his path. Eventually, he reached directly above the glow. He took a deep breath before climbing down the mountain. In a few seconds, Michael landed on the narrow path. The glow on the mountain's surface slowly faded away. But to the naked eye, the mountain's surface had no strange symbols or runes. Instead, it looked brownish with the volcano ash covering its surface. Michael ran his fingers through the surface, trying to see if there was something engraved in it. Yet he found nothing. It must be somewhere here, Michael said to himself. Then, he activated his X-ray vision. As soon as his eyes turned blue, he saw a dark square on the surface. Michael placed his palm on the dark square. Suddenly, a bolt of electricity ran down his spine through his hand. Sarba sensed the sudden spike in energy around them. Before he could question Michael, the mountain's surface trembled. To Vidora's surprise, the mountain's surface slowly creaked open like a secret door, revealing a dark corridor leading up somewhere. Michael took a deep breath before walking into the dark corridor with Vidora following him behind. After they took several steps into the corridor, the door closed behind them. Everything turned pitch black. Do you smell that? Asked Sarba, sniffing the air. What? The air, it smells like oil, said Sarba. He is right, Michael agreed with Sarba. In addition to oil, he could also smell a tinge of metal smell in the air. To light their path ahead, Michael conjured a ball of crimson-red flames. The flames dimly lit the dark place as Michael walked through the corridor. For a while, nothing came across his path. Even Vidora didn't utter a word. Hence, silence took over them. Seconds slowly turned minutes, and each minute felt like an eternity. As much as Michael loved peace and quiet, he wanted something to happen. Otherwise, he was afraid of being bored to death. As though the universe had listened to his plea, the corridor opened up to a spacious hall. Michael halted his steps in utter shock. A brightly lit hall with various iron tools and tables welcomed him. The light was coming from the lava oozing down the walls into the giant braziers. Everywhere Michael turned, he saw iron hammers, tools, and a giant anvil in the center. On the hall's corner was a furnace big enough to be called a room. In addition, there was also a complex system of pipes running across the ceiling, and a few metal tubes connected to the system hung down, swaying in the hot air. A forge, Michael mumbled under his breath. If the host is willing to buy the special dark ore and hilt, you can start forging the pair of dark swords in this very forge, the system sounded in his head. Hearing its words, the blacksmith living in Michael became excited. To be honest, he thought he would find a few special items. But he was completely caught off guard by the forge before him. The previous Dark Lord forged his swords in this very forge. And now, Michael was about to forge something better. Chapter 8:14 Birth of the Dark Swords 2 Michael stepped into the forge as the hall brightened. The forge welcomed its master by providing more light and heat to the hall. Without a doubt, the place looked ancient. Everything in the forge was covered in thick ash, and some of the little tools were rusted to the point there was no chance of restoring them. Michael looked for something that might give him a clue or two about the forge's origins. While looking around the room, a large anvil drew his attention to the center of the forge. As a 5-star blacksmith, he could tell a gorgeous anvil when he saw one. He ran his fingers through the anvil, wiping off the dust on its surface. Excitement coursed through his veins as he saw the vise, a beautifully crafted piece of contraption used to hold objects securely while they were worked on. It was made of a darkish metal and seemed it could hold large and heavy objects as its jaws had a grip that could exert considerable pressure. This forge was a blacksmith's dream come true. Finally, Michael turned his gaze toward the heart of any forge, the furnace. Whoever built the forge chose to build the furnace in the wall and let the smoke go straight to the mountain's top. No one would be able to tell the difference between volcanic fumes and the smoke coming from the forge. Although the forge had many intricate gears and small contraptions inside to make it more efficient, Michael could only see the rectangle hole into which the metal ores or the iron works should be put. On the side, Michael saw a lever and a rotating button built into the wall. "Pull the lever and see what happens," said Iag. Her eyes glistened with curiosity, just like Sarba. Michael already had a pretty good guess of what it would do. But he pulled the lever to confirm his assumption. The lever was considerably harder to pull. It took a bit of force to pull down. A normal person had no chance of pulling down the lever since even Michael had to use his strength. After he pulled down the lever, nothing happened for a while. Then, the forge trembled slightly. The temperature in the air rose by several degrees. A gust of wind shot out of the furnace, pushing out the ash. The furnace suddenly lit up as gooey lava oozed into it from above. It was like hot chocolate except hotter and brighter, like liquid gold. Michael immediately felt the intense heat from the lava. On the other hand, the rotating button had an arrow pointing up. He rotated the button anti-clockwise, expecting it would somehow reduce the heat. An oven, that was what this furnace reminded him of. After rotating the button, a strong gust of wind mixed with cold air sprayed onto the lava. Gradually the lava lost its heat and became bearable. "I wonder where that cold air is coming from," Kane frowned. Michael had the same question until he used his thermal vision and found the source of the cold air. His X-ray vision vaguely showed something familiar to Michael, an ancient ice core. "Makes sense," Michael mumbled under his breath. "What is?" asked Sarba. "You asked how the cold air is produced." "It's coming from the ancient ice core built within the furnace," said Michael. Congratulations to the host for finding 3 out of 5 requirements to forge the dark swords. The system's notification inside a golden tab blocked his vision. He was confused for a moment, but after looking around the forge, he realized the meaning of the system's words. So the 3 requirements were anvil, vise, and this furnace? Michael asked the system. The system didn't answer. But its silence spoke volumes. Now that he had a forge, he only needed the ore and the hilt to forge the dark swords. The dark ore and the hilt will cost the host 1 million badass points. The host is 400,000 badass points short of 1 million. The system suggests the host get a loan for 600,000 badass points. Michael sighed inside after hearing the system's words. Most of his badass points went back to the system when he bought the blueprint for the torpedo and dark swords. Luckily, his journey into the demon's grave awarded him enough badass points to reach 600,000 badass points. Still, he needed 400,000 to buy the ore and hilt for the dark swords. "How much do I have to pay you back after the loan?" asked Michael. 700,000 badass points. As much as Michael hated loans, he had to take one from the system. Having a pair of swords that could withstand the dark flames would give him an overwhelming advantage in any battle. His excitement overshadowed his hesitation about taking a loan. "I agree," said Michael as the system immediately gave him an additional 600,000 badass points. For a moment, he had 1,300,000 badass points. This amount was short-lived as the system took 1 million points for the ore and the hilt. A second later, 2 bars of dark metal materialized on the table before Michael. "The hilt will be given to the host at the last steps of forging the dark swords," said the system. Vidora was surprised by the sudden appearance of dark metal bars. They quickly landed beside the metal bars and studied the 2 bars. These bars were as dark as midnight. They were smooth and heavier than they looked. Vidora couldn't even move the bars an inch. "This is heavy," Iag growled, trying to move the bar with her head. Michael grabbed one bar and lifted it up. "You are right," Michael agreed with Iag. The metal bar was damn heavy as it made his biceps bulge up. Although the metal bar was the size of a standard smartphone, it weighed at least 200 kilograms. Michael couldn't help wondering how heavy his swords would be. He hoped they wouldn't be as heavy as the metal bars. With the metal bar in his hand, Michael looked around. He noticed a cauldron near the furnace. Vidora flew to the cauldron and carried it to Michael in their claws. "Let's begin." Michael removed his black arm cut and threw it to the side. It restricted his movements. Then, Michael placed the 2 metal bars into the cauldron. After he placed the 2 metal bars into the cauldron, it became too heavy for Vidora to carry. Hence, Michael carried the cauldron to the furnace and hung it above the hot lava. When he hung the cauldron, he noticed a pipe hanging directly above the cauldron. He followed the pipe to the table in the center. Strange enough, there was another pipe hanging with its end open. "Hey Ghost, look. There's a symbol engraved in here," Sarba raised his voice, hovering beside the dark metal pipe. Michael came to take a closer look at the pipe. As Sarba said, there was a tiny symbol engraved in the pipe. He could make out a shape like D in flames. Dark flames? Michael questioned himself as he conjured the dark flames. The temperature in the forge rose by several degrees as soon as the dark flames appeared. Michael pushed the dark flames into the metal pipe. To his surprise, the metal pipe hanging above the cauldron released a purple flame into the cauldron. Somehow, the ancient ice core tempered the dark flames and released purplish flames on the other end. This purple flame wasn't as hot and violent as the dark flames, but it still had the characteristics of the dark flames. The purple flames heated the cauldron in a blink of an eye. Soon, the cauldron turned dim orange on the edges. But when Michael stopped sending dark flames into the pipe, the purple flames stopped at the other end. Michael didn't think he would need to send dark flames to melt all the metals. The hot lava was hot enough to achieve that feat. However, the dark metal required dark flames. Having no other option, Michael sent a stream of dark flames into the metal pipes. Several runes in the metal pipe lit up, protecting them from melting down under the dark flames' intense heat. Several hours passed by in a blink of an eye. When Vidora flew closer to the cauldron, they saw the dark metal bars finally melting down. Surprisingly, tiny crimson-red lightning bolts crackled around the cauldron. They formed from gooey dark metal. Everything around the cauldron darkened as the forge trembled. Michael ignored the tremor and continued to send dark flames into the pipe. As a blacksmith, he knew when to stop sending the dark flames and let the metal cool off for a while. The forging of dark swords was very different from typical sword forging. Almost an hour later, Michael moved away from the metal pipe. Then, he searched for a metal block and found one buried deep under all the rusted tools and metal works. He carried the block of metal on his shoulder and put it on the table with a loud thud. Due to the forge's heat, Michael was sweating bullets. But he enjoyed himself working as a blacksmith. The metal block was a long rectangle with 3 meters long and a meter wide. In addition, it was at least 10 inches thick. Under Vidora's curious gaze, Michael fired dark beams out of his eyes and created a sword-shaped hollow in the metal block. The shape was neither too long nor too short. After the metal bars melted, he would have to pour the liquid metal into the shape and harden the metal. Since he was about to forge 2 swords, Michael found another metal block and repeated the process, except the second sword was just a few inches longer than the first. As Michael was preparing everything to forge his new swords, the braziers around him flickered. Michael put down the tongs and looked around the place. For some reason, the flames above the braziers dimmed out. Then, Michael felt everything go dead silent. To Michael's surprise, a holographic image of himself appeared right above the table he was working on. "Welcome to our forge," said the Dark Lord. Chapter 8:15, Birth of the Dark Swords 3. The sudden appearance of the past Dark Lord surprised Michael. But deep down, he expected the Dark Lord to leave a holographic recording of himself. The moment Michael stepped into the forge, he felt like he owned this place. For a few seconds, the Dark Lord's image flickered in the air. The device he left had been lying dormant for thousands of years. It was a miracle the device was still in working condition. "I knew you would find the forge. Listen carefully. By the time of this recording, I don't know how long this message will last or when you will reach the place," said the Dark Lord. He talked to Michael with his hands behind his back. Unlike earlier, the Dark Lord looked relieved and even had a smile on his face. "I have made some mistakes. That's what makes me human. But soon, everything would go back to normal. I hope you have found some of the armor pieces I left behind. Find them all and forge yourself a new one. Trust me, you will need it soon. I know you will feel frustrated by all the cryptic messages. To be honest, I do too. But this time array and time travel are not as simple as we think. Even now, I can't tell you my whole story as much as I want to. Our friend strictly ordered me not to." The Dark Lord emphasized the words "our friend." Michael had a feeling he was talking about the system. Since the system itself ordered him not to reveal his story, Michael couldn't blame the past Dark Lord. The Dark Lord smiled. Michael was pleased to see his past self smile. "This forge is my gift to you, along with my hammer. You need it to forge powerful weapons and armor. If my guess is right, you might be in a financial mess, and that's why you are here in the first place. When this recording is over, you will receive something that will open up a portal directly to this forge. But you must build a powerful portal in your castle first if you hadn't already." The Dark Lord paused for a moment and looked around as though he was searching for something. Meanwhile, Michael was delighted to hear he could travel to the demon's grave and to the forge from his castle. It seemed like his past self was more powerful and resourceful than he initially thought. Which made Michael wonder more about what the hell happened that pushed him to reset the entire universe. He had a feeling it was connected to Gaia but didn't know the whole story behind the past Dark Lord's reasoning. Where the hell did it go? The past Dark Lord searched for something frantically. A few seconds later, he turned his focus back to Michael. "The monsters you fought on your way here, they were modified by an asshole to fight me. Of course, I could kill them with a snap, but I don't think it would be true for you. So tread carefully. And keep Fedora out of trouble. I really miss the time when they were tiny and cute." The grown-up Fedora, the past Dark Lord, sighed and let out an exhausted smile. Fedora frowned as Iag almost hissed at the Dark Lord. "After your trip to the demon's grave, I hope they still call the place that. Your life will get a whole lot tougher. But here's a piece of advice from yourself to you: not everything is black and white. Also, don't always go for the kill. Some of our enemies are far more valuable alive than dead." As he said, the Dark Lord turned around and walked to his work table. Due to some reason, Michael couldn't clearly see the table or what he was working on. The time had corroded the recording and made it impossible to see anything other than the Dark Lord. "This array will fix everything," Michael heard the Dark Lord mumble. Then, he turned around once again. "What else I thought about telling you?" The Dark Lord rubbed his chin for a moment. "Ah yes," the Dark Lord snapped his finger, showing his sudden realization. "Finish your castle as soon as you can and spare no expense. You have no idea how many tried to penetrate mine and lost their lives. Sooner or later, you will get tired of all the killings." The Dark Lord paused as his expression grew darker. "Don't get tired. Because you are just starting your life as the Dark Lord. Always provide a reason for the people to fear you, my lord. Suddenly, Michael heard another voice. It sounded wise and elderly, but he had heard this voice before. Elder? Michael frowned. He sounded old, very old. Are you recording another message for yourself again? Elder asked the Dark Lord like a strict father. Unfortunately, Michael couldn't see Elder in the recording. Hey, is that Elder I am hearing? Iag asked Cain and Sarba in a husky voice. I think so, Sarba nodded. You cannot leave these messages everywhere, my lord. It will create unwanted branches in the timeline. You already took a big risk by breaking down your armor and leaving them behind. Who knows what catastrophe it's going to bring? Elder yelled at the Dark Lord. Look on the bright side, Elder. We won't be here to see it, the Dark Lord shrugged. Come on. Finish what you are doing. We have a lot to do in a short time, said Elder. You became grumpier with age. Relax and give me some time alone with myself. The Dark Lord looked over his shoulder and winked at Michael. The Dark Lord waited until Elder left the room. Huff, the Dark Lord sighed. I am going to miss many things, but grumpy Elder is not one of them. Try to find a way to stop him from getting older, because you do not want him to. Trust me, the Dark Lord chuckled. Who am I kidding? I am going to miss that old elf. It feels good to have someone look you in the eyes and lecture you, said the Dark Lord. At the peak of his life, no one dared even look at him, let alone lecture him. Almost the entire world trembled at the mere mention of his name. Only a few people existed in his timeline who had the guts to speak their minds before him. Elder was one of them. Just by looking into the Dark Lord's eyes, Michael could tell how much he would miss his world. The Dark Lord sacrificed everything so Michael could fix his mistakes and live the life he deserved. Soon, the hologram began to flicker. Despite his advice, I will still leave some recordings for you. Take care of everyone and everything. Who knows, we might even meet at some point. After all, time is a mysterious thing, and life is full of surprises. After these words escaped the Dark Lord's mouth, he vanished into thin air. As soon as he disappeared, the table before Michael trembled. A copper ring big enough to fit in his hand materialized on the table. With another tremor, a silver hammer with many intricate runes engraved in it appeared. At first, Michael gently grabbed it and studied the ring. Is that a portal? Asked Iag as Michael nodded. With this, we can get in and out of the demon's grave as we please, said Michael with a grin. Countless ideas popped into his mind and made him excited for the journey ahead. However, his excitement was doused by the Dark Lord himself when he appeared again above the table once again in the holographic form. And forgot to tell you, the monsters in this realm aren't your typical XP farm. Every death makes someone I can't name strong. Don't make your enemies stronger, the Dark Lord warned Michael. Judging by the serious tone of his voice, Michael let go of the idea of farming experience points by killing the monsters here. What did he mean by XP farm? Sarba asked his siblings, but they seemed confused as a child lost in a parade. After warning Michael, the Dark Lord's figure completely vanished into thin air. The Dark Lord left Michael with more questions than answers. For instance, Michael wanted to know who created these monsters in the demon's grave, as well as how he would grow stronger with the death of each monster. The more time Michael spent in the realm, the more he realized there was more to this place than meets the eye. Finally, Michael took a deep breath and decided to clean the mess in the forge. Returning to the metal pipe, Michael sent a stream of dark flames and continued to melt the dark metal bars. Although he was focused on forging the swords and cleaning the forge, he couldn't help wondering about everything he had heard from the past Dark Lord. Michael lost track of time working the forge. While Vidora was asleep on the table, he continued to melt down the metal bars. After 2 days, to be exact, Michael saw the metal bars completely melt and take a liquid form. He covered his palms with dark flames and lifted up the cauldron with dark metal liquid inside. Sweat beads formed on his forehead as he slowly carried the cauldron to the table. When he reached the table, he slowly poured out the black liquid into the metal block with the sword-shaped hollow. The black liquid ran through the hollow, slowly taking the shape of a sword. After filling both metal blocks, Michael placed the cauldron on the floor. A typical blacksmith would wait for the liquid to harden, but Michael was anything but typical. Hence, he took out his doom bringer and summoned frost to cool down the black liquid. The black liquid sizzled as tiny red lightning bolts cracked around the metal block. Somehow, the dark metal created these tiny lightning bolts. These lightning bolts crackled around the black liquid like tiny guardians. Michael focused the frost beam toward the black liquid, tempering the metal. Even with the frost beam, the black liquid took hours before slowly starting to harden. He then grabbed the hammer, preparing to douse the dark swords into hot lava and shape it up. Chapter 8:16. The dark sword. Several hours passed in a blink of an eye. At that moment, the forge was filled with the sound of a hammer hitting the metal. Michael was alone in the forge, peacefully forging his dark swords. Vidora was asleep after helping Michael clean up the forge. After Michael spent hours sweeping the floor, cleaning up the walls, and destroying all the rusted metal works, the forge looked pristine. Almost all the tools needed to forge powerful weapons and armor were readily available in the forge except for ores and some other materials. Standing before the anvil, Michael raised his hammer and brought it down on the black sword. His muscles twitched and bulged up as he kept hitting the sword with the hammer. Michael was drenched in sweat as he looked like he had just bathed. Even after the dark metal cooled down, it radiated a strange heat that was powerful enough to melt a man's skin. Usually, a heated sword would be submerged in oil or water in some situations. On the contrary, Michael had molten lava in one metal barrel and bone-chilling ice created by the ancient ice core in another. The dark sword was slowly taking the shape Michael wanted it to. Its surface was crimson red after being hit by the hammer repeatedly. Finally, Michael raised the sword and submerged it in the lava. The sword remained submerged in lava for a while until Michael couldn't hold it by the end. His palms were bloody red due to the heat. When he took out the dark sword, hot lava oozed out from its surface. Michael immediately submerged the sword again in the frost beside the lava. The ice sizzled, turning into vapor because of the intense heat. As soon as he put the sword in the ice, countless tiny crimson-red lightning bolts crackled around the dark sword. Few more hours to go, Michael mumbled under his breath before taking out the second sword and repeating the same process. As though nature itself had sensed the birth of dark swords, the sky above the mountain darkened. Unknown to Michael, a lightning storm was raging outside. As a result, the monsters outside were terrified to the core. The demon's grave had never seen heavy rain or a storm in thousands of years. But at that moment, the storm raged outside, along with hundreds of lightning bolts striking the realm from above. Michael paid no attention to the weather outside. Ayag slowly opened her eyes to the sound of rumbling thunder. The mountain trembled as thunderclaps echoed through the realm. Her vision was slightly blurred after the long nap. She shook her head, clearing her sight. Sarba and Cain woke up after her and saw Michael's back. To their surprise, they felt a strange, powerful energy in the forge. Moreover, they couldn't help hearing a strange buzzing noise. "Hey, you finished the swords?" asked Ayag. Michael slowly turned around with his new swords in his hand. Just the simple look of the dark sword stunned them speechless. The blade was as dark as midnight, with tiny crimson-red lightning bolts dancing around from the tip to the hilt. Light coming from the braziers was reflected on the blade's surface. In the faint light, Vidora noticed the complex engravings and runes, but they were almost unnoticeable to the naked eye. Any oblivious man could tell how exceptional the swords were. Michael gave the blade a matte black finish and designed the hilt like a dragon coiling around the sword. Unlike any other swords in the world, the dark swords were exceptionally heavy. Each sword weighed at least 50 kilograms and required immense raw power to swing around. But despite their weight, the swords were perfectly balanced. The swords were black from top to bottom except for the hilt, where the dragons had a tinge of redness, and their eyes glimmered icy blue due to the use of an ancient ice core. If the swords were not dashing enough, the lightning bolts crackling around the blade added an extra layer of beauty to them. Let us see how sharp they are, Iag asked curiously as Michael turned his gaze to the barrel with hot lava inside. He swung the dark sword across the barrel. When he swung the sword, the crackling noise sounded louder. Then, nothing happened for a second. Iag frowned, but soon, half of the metal barrel slid down from its lower half. Michael felt no resistance from the metal barrel. To be honest, he didn't even feel cutting the metal barrel. The dark sword went through the metal barrel like a hot knife through very soft butter. Wow, even Cain was surprised by the dark swords. Just need to put a summoning rune on them when we return home, said Michael, swinging the swords in the air. Michael finally put the dark swords into the sheaths on his back. They formed an X on his back. This way, he could unsheath them faster than from the sheaths hanging on his waists. Plus, it would look cooler. With his dark swords finished, he could finally venture deep into the realm. He threw a final look at the forge and prepared to leave the place. What do you say we take these babies for a trial run? Asked Michael as Vidroa bobbed their heads up and down enthusiastically. Michael exited the forge through the corridor he came in the first place. Eventually, he reached the mountaintop and stood on the edge, looking at the realm before him. The sky was alive as heavy rain crashed furiously to the ground. Ancient trees in the distance toppled, lightning shattered the sky, and thunder shook the ground. Rain began to pour furiously, and monstrous tornadoes littered the realm. This storm was the worst Michael had ever seen. Rain fell like bullets, destroying anything and everything in its path. Out of nowhere, a loud thunderclap resonated in the sky. Michael stood there on edge, a step away from falling down. Due to the intense heat coming from the boiling lava, the droplets were vaporized before they could even reach the lava. Still, the vapor created a thick white mist around Mount Hades. Look, Iag pointed at the horizon as Michael saw a giant bat flying in his direction. As though the dark swords had sensed the threat, they produced more lightning bolts. These bolts crackled around the sheath as well as Michael. Cracking his neck, Michael took a step forward, dropping down from the mountain. Gravity pulled him down with enough force to create a large crater in the ground when he landed. If someone else fell from the mountain, their bones would have shattered to pieces, and their body would have turned into bloody mush. But Michael comfortably landed on his feet. He slowly walked forward as the bat flew closer and closer to Michael. The bat was at a half-immortal stage, several times stronger than the bat he fought outside the demon's grave. Michael unsheathed his dark swords and waited for the bat to attack him. The bat was big enough to cast a large shadow on the ground. When it flew closer to him, Michael heard a strange noise coming from its mouth. He stood still as the bat dived down to rip him apart with its claws. Finally, the bat was just a few meters away from Michael's head. In a blink of an eye, Michael threw the dark sword at the bat. The sword soared through the air like a bullet and went straight through the bat's chest. Blood splattered on the ground as the bat had a hole in its chest. The sword went clean through its chest and came outside. The bat roared in pain before crashing down to the ground. Screaming in pain, the bat flapped its wings frantically. But no matter how hard it tried to fly away, the bat simply couldn't. The dark sword penetrated its very heart. Vidora snickered at the bat as the bat roared with its eyes burning with pain and rage. Then, Vidora flew away to pick up the dark sword Michael threw. While Michael made his way to the bat with the second dark sword in his hand. The bat crawled backward in fear. TSK TSK TSK, Michael showed his disapproval of the bat's actions by shaking his head. The bat could have avoided death if it chose to fly the other way. Although the past Dark Lord warned him about killing the monsters recklessly, he would not let go of those who attacked him alive. Since the bat tried to kill him, it was only fair that he returned the favor. By the time Michael was just an arm-reaching distance from the bat, Vidora had returned to him carrying his other sword in its legs. The bat groaned as Michael pressed its claws under his feet. When Michael clenched the swords tighter, the engravings on the blade lit up. He just swung the dark swords as the bat's head flew off of its shoulder. Ding! Congratulations to the host for killing a half-immortal stage level 4 monster. The reward is 1 million experience points and 25,000 badass points. Michael heard the system in his head. These dark swords were powerful enough to kill any immortals. They didn't need to be infused with an immortal bone like a typical immortal killing weapon. It took Michael only one swing to cut the bat's head clean off. Without its head, the bat's body violently twitched, splashing blood all over the place. Only then did Michael realize how powerful his swords were. He regretted not forging them way earlier. With these swords, his battle prowess shot through the roof. Vidora was stunned to see the dead bat on the ground. The battle literally lasted for a few seconds. Outside the demon's grave, the fusion stage bat gave Michael a headache as Iag had to use her power to disrupt its powers. But now, Michael killed the bat in a few seconds. After killing the bat, Michael flicked his sword, removing the blood on the blade. It's a pity. I was thinking of covering the blades with the dark flames, Michael sighed. Not to jinx the situation, but I have a feeling we will come across more monsters on our way, said Sarba. Speaking of which, where are we going next? Asked Iag. To a gold mine, said Michael. Chapter 8:17. Another world within the demon's grave. Killing the bat was only the first step of his big plan in the demon's grave. Michael didn't slow down or seek shelter despite the raging storm and the heavy rain. Granted, the storm and the rain made the terrain wet and walking difficult, but it also terrified the monsters. Everywhere Michael looked, he saw no monster. Even the colossal bull he saw from the mountain was nowhere to be seen. Lightning cracked the red sky, sending heaven's light through the storms. Even the rain came in orchestrated rhythm, appearing as the master of the scene yet arriving on unheard cues. The wind ran as if it had been restrained for time out of mind, and it was determined to outrun any chaser. The sound of it was a strange song, as if howling yearned for a melody. Michael was completely drenched in the rain. We've been walking for hours, Sarba said, sitting on Michael's shoulder. Don't you have a spare long coat? I hate getting wet, Iag complained. As she said, Michael wore nothing to cover his upper body except the sheath on his back. In his deep thinking, Michael didn't hear Iag and Sarba. Instead, he was more focused on forming alchemy formulas in his head. There were no monsters or a threat to break Michael's concentration. He didn't even mind the raging storm. He's not listening to us, is he? Asked Iag as Kane shook his head. Michael crossed the meadows after almost 5 hours and saw a lake in the distance. Michael's destination was deep within the lake, according to the system. Thanks to his alchemist profession, Michael concocted a pill that enabled him to breathe underwater. If it wasn't for the high pressure under the lake, he could have used his mask. Since it wasn't the case, Msiel had to connect this pill using extremely rare herbs from his herbal garden in the Sunrise sect. Even in an eerie place like the demon's grave, the lake glistened like a ruby under the red sky. In that land of creeping beauty lay a disk of brightest red. The lake was brighter than the colors of one's dreams. It was the minerals of the glacier that shone cyan, turquoise, and ruby red. Like a mirror on the wall, it was oval and flat. The surface was forever guarded against the winds by the crown of barren hills around. At the edge, the land met and carried right on as a perfect reflection. Looking up into the sky and down into the water was just the same. Although Michael sensed several monsters around him, none dared to attack him. Michael had a feeling the red lightning bolts around the dark swords had something to do with it. As usual, he asked the system about these lightning bolts but received no answer from it. Whenever the system went silent when he asked a question, it raised Michael's concern. For instance, the system gave no explanation or answers about the mysterious woman he met outside the demon's grave. Sometimes, Michael had to figure things out on his own without the system's help. I hope you like getting wet, said Michael as Iag rolled her eyes. I just said I hate getting wet. You are a jerk, ghost, she bit Michael's ear. Nibbling Iag's head, Michael walked closer and closer to the lake. With a flick of his wrist, Michael took out a sapphire blue pill and tossed it into his mouth. His muscles immediately ached, especially the back of his ears. It felt like someone was burning his skin with cigarettes. The pain lasted for a few minutes. Then, Vidora saw several gashes appearing behind his ears. Without wasting any time, Michael dived into the lake, swimming deeper and deeper. As his body moved through the clear water, he was surprised to see the golden sand and the sight around him. The first thing that caught his eye was the variety of sea life. Hundreds of fishes in every color of the rainbow and more swam past him without fearing him. Some big fishes floated lazily as others disappeared with a flick of a bright fin. For a lake in a demon's grave, it was artistic, to say the least. Luckily, Vidora didn't need any pill or potion to breathe underwater. They swam along with Michael like expert swimmers. As they were following Michael, their attention turned to the expanse of a coral reef that stretched as far as one could see. They blanketed the golden sand like a colorful bed sheet. Surprisingly, everything underwater was full of color and life. The red light coming from the dark swords illuminated the closest section of the reef, highlighting a formation of corals. Each section of coral was beautifully formed, but none was quite like any other. Michael was tempted to harvest some and put them in the lake near the castle. However, Michael was the type of person who would rather see a flower in a plant than in someone's head. "What is that?" Iag asked her siblings in telepathy, looking at an octopus. The creature peeked its head over through the coral and gawked at them with its big eyes. Soon, the octopus moved through the coral, revealing itself for a moment before shrinking back into a crevasse. A hidden gem amongst corals, one of many. The deeper Michael swam, the prettier the lake turned out to be. Many unknown creatures buried themselves under the sand. The entire lake was like a treasure chest, enclosing unfathomable treasures in ever smallest sliver. Everything was deadly silent around Michael. But this silence was short-lived. Suddenly, they heard a chittering noise. When Michael looked over his shoulder, he saw 5 creatures that resembled dolphins skim by. With water all around them, they almost seemed to fly, moving effortlessly. Propelling their sleek bodies swiftly forwards with a flick of a gray tail. According to the system, Michael still had a long way to reach his destination. He wondered how the things he needed could exist underwater. A while later, Michael was surprised to see a shipwreck. He wanted to investigate the shipwreck even though it didn't seem to have any treasures. But when he was about to swim toward the wreck, his view was obscured by a huge shark that drifted lazily by, pushing Michael and Vidora aside with the water it displaced. A whale shark, mouth stretched wide to gather food. To Michael's surprise, the shark was at the half-immortal stage. If Michael wanted, he could fight the shark and kill it easily. However, blood might attract more sharks, and if they were also at the half-immortal stage, he would be in trouble. Like it or not, Michael was in their home ground. Besides, he wanted to reach his destination without wasting his energy. After all, who knew how many enemies he would have to face there? Michael slowly swam away from the shipwreck and the shark without making any sound. Finally, when he put a safe distance between him and the shark, a swarm of shining goldfish coiled and winded their way past. They lit the underwater like a swarm of fireflies, sending glints of light in every direction. On the golden sand, oysters and colorful shells were scattered everywhere. They were a living explosion of beauty. Limpets glued themselves to rocks, setting themselves in like jewels in a necklace. Michael scooped up a shell from the sand and put it in the system's storage as a souvenir. Eventually, an archway appeared in his sight. It was definitely man-made and contained a realm tear in the center. Unlike the emerald green realm tear that served as the entrance to the demon's grave, this realm tear radiated an icy blue light. Michael's eyes were lit with excitement. If everything went according to his plan, he could put an end to their financial blunder. Even the god of darkness depended on gold coins to grow his army and build his castle. Michael flapped his legs, dashing toward the realm tear. He was actually surprised, but it made sense. The realm tear made him realize the things he needed were in another realm. A realm within a realm. This place keeps surprising me, Michael said to himself as he tried to enter through the realm tear. But an invisible force pushed him away. What the hell? Michael creased his brows. What happened? Iag asked Michael wordlessly. Unlike Michael, Vidora felt no resistance from the realm tear. Once again, Michael moved toward the realm tear, and this time, he resisted the force. Michael quickly used his X-ray vision to see an energy dome around the archway. Michael unsheathed his dark swords. Then, he swung the swords, cutting the invisible dome. The dark swords cut through the dome. It produced a powerful shock wave that pushed both Vidora and Michael several meters away. Then, the realm tear created a suction force that pulled Michael and Vidora along with gallons of lake water. Everything around Michael turned dark. But before he disappeared into the realm tear, he caught Vidora and held them closer to his chest with one hand and the dark sword in the other. Lights out for Michael for a few minutes. Even his X-ray vision turned out to be useless. He felt like he was flying through space. At least the feeling was familiar. After an unknown amount of time, Michael was thrown onto a soft ground. He coughed up the blood and slowly opened his eyes. His eyes adjusted to the light. Everything looked blurry for a few moments. When Michael was finally able to see his surroundings, he was taken aback by surprise. He was on a mountain cliff, overlooking the massive cliffs and towering fjords that crept through the rainforest. Great scarves of cloud swirled around the blue sky. It was a primeval landscape, vast and forbidding. But this wasn't how Michael would describe the place. To him, this realm was magical, like a fairy tale land. The trees were alien, and most of the realm looked too cyan. There were waterfalls, rivers, and distant flocks of winged creatures. "What is this place?" Vidora asked Michael. They shared the same dumbfounded look on Michael's face. "That's weird," said Sarba. His gaze was locked on Michael's dark sword in his hand. When Michael looked at the sword, he saw no red lightning bolts. But that wasn't the only change Michael noticed. He couldn't feel any energy in the atmosphere. In other words, his cultivation power had betrayed him. Luckily, Michael could still access the system and use the arch-energy crystals to power himself up. "Our god has appeared." Suddenly, Michael heard a thunderous voice in the distance. Somehow, Michael didn't think it was just a coincidence. Soon, a flock of winged creatures shot to the sky through the rainforest. They were on their way to Michael. Chapter 8:18 The Wood Elves and the World of Idanes. The world of Idanes was primitive and inhabited by a race called Zoralines. They were later named the Wood Elves by the Dark Lord. Although the world was affected by the time array when the Dark Lord reset the universe, there were still some remnants of the Dark Lord in Idanes. They worshipped him as their only god. Until 2 years ago, the Wood Elves lived peacefully without major wars. However, everything changed one day. The barrier that kept Idanes hidden from the outside world broke as the soldiers of Skyhall invaded their world and slaughtered thousands of Wood Elves. The Wood Elves fought the Skyhall army with primitive bows and arrows, while the Skyhall used high-powered weapons such as cannons, trebuchets, and wyverns. At that moment, Tazkin, a young warrior from the forest tribe, was risking his life to steal medicine for the wounded villagers and his teammates back home. He was accompanied by his wife, Thilv, and 4 comrades. The Wood Elves called the Skyhall soldiers by the name demons since they brought death and destruction wherever they went. Like most of the Wood Elves, Tazkin had coppery skin and hazel eyes. His hair was jet black with a hue of copper red. Compared to the elves and dark elves, Wood Elves were slightly taller and had pointier ears. Contrary to those elves, Wood Elves were kind and friendly. They would have formed an alliance with Skyhall and happily offered them valuable resources if Skyhall chose the path of diplomacy. But no, Skyhall waged war and slaughtered thousands of them without a shred of mercy. All of those deaths and destruction were for the natural resources Idanes possessed. This world was once treasured by the Dark Lord himself, and Skyhall had no clue the Dark Lord was on his way to save the world from them. Tazkin and his group were walking through a bluish, ancient forest. It reeked of age. Its woody incense was from centuries of snapping branches crashing to the forest's floor and rotting silently. The composting, organic smell rose up in waves like a miasma. Every sprawling tree they passed under reminded Tazkin of a watchful guardian, a silent sentinel of the groves. Taskin and his team used branches and veins to traverse through the forest without making a noise. They knew the forest like the back of their hand. The Skyhall soldiers used contraptions to traverse through the forest when they were in a good mood. Otherwise, they would burn down everything in their path just to travel hundreds of meters into the forest. Hundreds of ancient trees with unlimited potential turned to ashes in their hands. Taskin and his team were on their way to the forest center, where the mother tree was. The mother tree was the oldest in the world, spanning hundreds of acres. The wood elves had a ritual of climbing the mother tree, which would take months. Countless wood elves lost their lives trying to reach the top. The wood elves believed they could get the mother tree's blessing and hear their god's voice by reaching the top. The deeper Taskin and his team went, the more mystical and spellbinding the forest became. Huge roots spread-eagled the ground, twisting like the great backs of sea dinosaurs. The foliage became thick and lush, forming an arch of fairy-tale sapphire blue above their heads. Arthritic boughs, gnarled with age, dripped their bounty of nuts onto the path. Briars, brambles, and berry trees flanked the trail, making it impenetrable on either side. Shuffling noises came from deep in the interior, deadened by the cunningly woven web of leaves. A troop of winged badgers crossed the winding trail in front of them at one point. They were finishing up their early morning foraging and looked startled to see the wood elves. As if on cue, a blue feather bird erupted from the knot of trees. Soon, a few more of its beaked companions joined the flock, creating a symphony of song. The heart-haunting melody was an elixir for the soul. Their melody used to soothe the wood elves' souls. But after the demons appeared, these birds cried more often than they sang. Despite the ash and smell of blood in the air, the sap-sweet fragrance of the forest washed over them. Finally, Taskin arrived at a wide glade, where the ancient trees fell away, revealing the bespeckled blue sky. The last of the morning stars were glinting like silver earrings, luminous and bright. An orgold moon with a blue ring hung quietly in the distance, casting a honeyed sheen over the trees. Taskin and his men sat their backs against a lightning-blasted tree trunk and watched the demon castle in the distance. The demons scorched hundreds of trees, and everything lived in the area to build their castle and the surrounding buildings. Taskin could still hear the cries of his people when the demons first arrived. They built the castle with the wood they got from the mother tree's branches and the roots as defensive walls. Once, a holy site turned into a burial site for thousands of wood elves. Since the Skyhall sent a total of 1,000 soldiers, they were able to build a castle in a month. The castle had 11 broad, square towers connected by large, thin walls made of blue marble stones they mined in Idanes. To mine those stones, the Skyhall slaughtered an entire tribe that protected and lived in the mines for centuries. Small windows were scattered generously around the walls in seemingly perfect symmetry, along with symmetric crenellations for archers and artillery to shoot down the wood elves who dared to get near the mother tree. A huge gate with heavy metal doors guarded the castle. It was the only easy way in. Any other side would be futile. Various barracks, camps, and small buildings were scattered outside the castle gates. The soldiers and some of the merchants who were related to Skyhall elders lived in those buildings. Taskin and his men had no idea who lives in the castle, as none of them stepped into the castle. This castle was the most protected place in the entire world. Daring to invade the castle would only result in certain earth. Luckily, Taskin and their men had no need to go into the castle. Instead, their target was one of the infirmary buildings where the Skyhall soldiers kept healing potions. "We should wait for the nightfall and then strike," Vaikok, one of Taskin's men, suggested, only to see Thilv shake her head. "We don't have time. They need those magical potions ASAP, Taskin nodded. She is right. Time is not in our favor. It's now or never, said Taskin. His voice betrayed him, showing his uncertainty and worry about the plan. Deep down, Taskin knew attacking the demons in broad daylight was nothing short of suicide. Still, they had to do it for the sake of their people. 50 lives depended on them and the magical potions. Taskin's men sighed. Although they all knew the plan was suicidal, they would follow Taskin to hell itself. After all, If it weren't for Taskin's leadership, they would have died along with thousands of other wood elves when the demons first invaded them. Moreover, Taskin was the only wood elf who managed to kill one of the demon generals and steal one of their weapon shipments. Unfortunately, the wood elves lacked the technical knowledge to assemble the weapon to its full form. Vaikok, go and scout the area ahead. Do not get caught, said Taskin. Vaikok, the brown-haired wooden elf, nodded and slowly crouched forward. As the team scout, recon was his job. Hugging the tree, Vaikok slid down to the ground like a monkey. He used the foliage to his advantage. But there was no foliage once he entered the castle land. The Skyhall soldiers knew how the wood elves operated. Steel was the one and only advantage the wood elves had over them. Therefore, the Skyhall soldiers cut down everything, including trees and bushes, around the castle. Vaikok used the huts and buildings to hide and walk around. He took a mental note of how many soldiers and the paths of their patrol. Meanwhile, Taskin, his wife and the 3 other wood elves waited for Taskin to return. Suddenly, they heard a loud explosion near the castle. Black smoke rose through one of the castle towers. By the name of the Dark Lord, what is that? Must be one of their new weapons, Thilv gritted her teeth. Once the Dark Lord's blessing returns to our people, we will pay them back several folds, said Thilv. No god came to our aid when they slaughtered our people, Thilv. If we want to change our fate, we have to fight for it, rebuked Taskin. Do not speak like that, Taskin. We must pray to the Dark Lord when the time of our needs. He will definitely answer our prayers. Taskin did not want to argue with his wife. The Wood Elves were a god-fearing race that worshipped the Dark Lord for thousands of years. They didn't see him, but they worshipped his statues, which protected them for centuries. However, after the demons invaded them and slaughtered thousands, some of the Wood Elves like Taskin lost their trust in the Dark Lord. One couldn't blame them for losing faith in a higher power after witnessing their race being pushed to the brink of extinction. Taskin had no faith in a god who didn't raise a finger against the demons, unlike his wife. Eventually, Vaikok finished his recon and returned to them. 20 fully armored guards on the way to the infirmary, Vaikok reported back to Taskin. Did you see the healing potions? Asked Thilv as Vaikok nodded. But he didn't have any excitement or even the slightest joy in his eyes. Instead, Vaikok seemed like something had affected him deeply. What did you see, Vaikok? He is here, Taskin, said Vaikok with a grave tone. His eyes contained fear and worry like never before. General Tar? Asked Taskin as the others looked terrified except for Thilv, whose eyes burned with rage and bloodlust. Report said he was looking for something in the mines. Taskin creased his brows. This mission got a whole lot tougher with Tar being on the castle ground. If this were any other day, Taskin would have opted to back off. But today, he must retrieve those potions. His brother's life depended on the healing potion. Chapter 8:19 General Tar was an orc assigned by the Skyhall to build the castle and pacify the locals in Idanes. Unlike a typical orc, Tar was a war-hungry death merchant who preferred to kill than ask questions. Single-handed Tar killed thousands of wood elves. Taskin and Tar had a bit of history between them. After the Skyhall invaded the wood elves, Taskin fought Tar to rescue his team and actually managed to achieve such an impossible task. Moreover, Taskin gave a scar that Tar still hadn't forgotten. But unlike Tar, Taskin didn't thirst for a rematch. Instead, Taskin only wanted to steal the healing potions and get the hell out of this place. Follow my lead, said Vaikok. Vaikok, you know the way. Take the lead, said Taskin. The wood elves climbed down the trees and headed toward the infirmary. They moved as nimble as the wind itself. One could barely hear their footsteps. The armored soldiers' heavy boots' clunking sound masked Taskin and his men's movements. Step by step, the wood elves moved closer to the encampments. Soon, Taskin noticed a demon armed to the teeth patrolling between the two camps. Some of the soldiers were sleeping in each camp. This armored soldier turned around and stood between the camps for a few moments. He seemed exhausted after walking back and forth wearing the heavy armor. Outside Idanes, they had arch energy and were powerful enough to lift even boulders. Hence, wearing armor was no headache for them. Besides, they could achieve more protection with a spell instead of this armor. The Skyhall soldier sweated bullets inside the metal armor. Taskin slowly took out the bow hanging on his back. He knocked an arrow and aimed for the gap between the soldier's helmet and shoulder. After taking a deep breath, Taskin released the arrow. Jiritich, the metal soldier, groaned as Thilv grabbed the soldier before he hit the ground. If he fell down, the metal armor would make a sound loud enough to wake the soldiers sleeping inside the camps. While dragging the soldier back, Thilv unsheathed a crude dagger and plunged it near the arrow, and ended the soldier's life instantly. She then cautiously placed the body on the ground without making a noise. "Let's go," Vaikok whispered as the group moved around the camps. "Where are the potions?" asked Taskin. Vaikok pointed his finger at a wooden building across several camps and soldiers. Fortunately, Vaikok was able to sneak closer to the building using the tents as his cover. Since the Skyhall soldiers patrolled the area like clockwork, Taskin and his men were confident enough to sneak past them. But the only complication was General Tar and his wolves. These wolves were specially bred to track down wood elves and their tribes. Each wolf was ferocious enough to rip a wood elf apart in a few moments. Just thinking about the wolves, Taskin's shoulder ached. He looked at the deep claw mark on his right shoulder for a moment before following Vaikok behind. One by one, Taskin and his men moved past the camps. For some reason, it didn't feel right to Taskin. Not a single soldier spotted them, as things went pretty smoothly. But that was what worried Taskin. Vaikok halted his steps behind a wooden building, taking advantage of the shade provided by the roof. The team stopped for a few moments to catch their breath. "Something's bothering you, my love." Thilv turned her gaze at Taskin. The dark lines on his forehead betrayed how worried he was. "Everything's going smooth." "Too smooth, to be exact," said Taskin. His words surprised Vaikok and the others. As far as they were concerned, if anything, Taskin should feel grateful that everything was going in their favor. Instead, Taskin looked worried to the core. Taskin sighed, looking at their confused faces. "Not to jinx things, but when was the last time everything went according to our plan?" "Those demons always pulled one over us whenever we thought we had them cornered," said Taskin. "I understand how you feel. But this is not the time for second thoughts. We are deep within the belly of the beast. If we don't get those potions, people are going to die," Thilv said in a low-pitched voice. She cared more for her people than anyone, including Taskin. Unlike her, Taskin wasn't born into her tribe. On the contrary, Taskin was an orphan. Thilv's uncle found him in the forest and raised him as his own. They fell in love at a young age, and Taskin had to climb the top of the mother tree to get Thilv's father's blessing to marry Thilv. Taskin was one of the few who managed to complete such a task and lived to tell tales about it. Taskin nodded, pushing all the doubts and uncertainties to the back of his mind. This was no time for second-guessing, as Thilv said. To their sake, Taskin had to look confident even though he wasn't. He signaled Vaikok to lead the way with his eyes as the wood elf slowly walked around the building. Suddenly, a loud bell rang from the castle. Their bodies went rigid, thinking they were caught for a moment. Midday break. "Come on, everyone. Take 5, they heard someone calling the soldiers from the center of the camps. Luckily, the soldiers were moving to the center to get their bellies filled. As a result, the patrol routes turned empty and gave Taskin and his men enough leeway to get into the infirmary, take the potions, and disappear into the forest without alerting Tar. At least, that's what they planned. In a few minutes, almost every soldier in the area went to the center and formed a circle around a giant cauldron with boiling porridge in it. Meanwhile, the wood elves hastened their steps. They crouched toward the infirmary as fast as they could. Finally, they came to a wooden building with a board with a leaf symbol hanging above the door. Taskin slowly opened the door after looking back and forth. When the door slowly opened, they saw a couple of soldiers sleeping on white beds. These soldiers seemed pale, shivering and gritting their teeth as though they were in great pain. While Taskin's gaze was locked on the 6 soldiers, Philv and the others noticed the crate full of glistening green vials. There it is. Vaikok closed the door behind them and pointed at the crate. Let's take it and get the hell out of this place, another wood elf behind Philv said. When Philv was about to take a step toward the crate, Taskin stopped her by her wrist. If they have the magical healing potions, why do these soldiers look sick? Asked Taskin. As much as the Philv and the others wanted to take the healing potions and escape the place, Taskin's words made them wonder and think deeply about what he had just said. Vaikok and the others creased their brows. They knew Taskin was right. These magical healing potions could cure anything, yet these soldiers looked anything but healthy. On top of that, the healing potions were right on the table, and the crate contained enough potions for all the soldiers in the room. Yet, for some reason, the demons chose not to give the potions to their comrades. We can think about it when we get back to the tribe. Let's just take them and get the hell out of here, Vaikok rushed Taskin. Seeing no other choice, Philv quickly dashed to the crate and took it in her hand. On her way back, she wanted to kill the 6 soldiers. But luckily for them, Philv prioritized escaping the place over slitting their throats. Taskin turned around to leave the building. He threw one last gaze over his shoulder at the soldiers before opening the door. The moment he opened the door, Taskin's body went rigid. His heart almost jumped out of his chest. To their shock, General Tar was waiting outside to welcome them with his 5 gray wolves. General Tar was a brutish, aggressive, ugly, and malevolent orc, contrasting with the wood elves. He had several piercings all over his body and wore a necklace made of his enemy's ears. He held a heavy sword as tall as an average human on his shoulder. When General Tar saw Taskin and his team, he showed an ugly smile that really highlighted his blood-stained teeth and the tusks sticking out of his mouth. The gray wolves bore their teeth with their blue eyes glimmering with ferocity. They were one signal away from ripping Taskin and the others apart. Each wolf was 5 feet wide and tall as a wood elf's waist. Saliva trickled down their mouths as though Taskin and his men were juicy pieces of meat. To what do I owe the pleasure of this visit? General Tar had a perfect brutish voice for his monstrous body. He slowly ran his hand through the deep scar on his left cheek. Tar almost went blind in one eye. If Taskin swung the sword a few inches higher and Tar would have lost his left eye. Tar wore the scar as a symbol of shame. Until he could wash his face with Taskin's blood, Tar had no plans to rest easy. General Tar, Taskin stopped in front of his men, shielding them with his body. The soldiers behind Tar raised their swords and handheld crossbows at Taskin. Tar's men were in the number hundreds, while Taskin only had 5 men. No matter what strategy they used, there was no chance for them to win this battle. You gave me something to remember you by. It's only fair I return the favor. Don't you think so, men? General Tar asked. Yes, General, Tar's men shouted in unison as Tar brought down the heavy sword to the ground from his shoulder. It seems like our friends are here to take the healing potions meant for our men, said Tar. We can't have you take what's ours unless, Tar's words trailed, unless what? Philv snarled. Unless Taskin bests me in a duel, Tar said, looking Taskin in the eyes. But you always have the option to run away. In that case, my babies will be more than happy to give a chase. You have 3 seconds to decide. Tar raised 3 fingers. 1, 2, I accept. Taskin stepped forward, having no other choices. Outrunning the wolves and the soldiers was nothing but suicide. At least by fighting Tar, he could pull a surprise move on Tar that might let his wife escape the place. Chapter 820, Michael being a god. When Michael heard the echo in the distance, he was surprised. Soon, many figures riding winged beasts appeared on the horizon. These beasts resembled giant butterflies. Having no idea what was happening in the world, Michael remained on the hilltop, waiting for the figures to come to him. While they were flying toward him, Michael accessed the system's storage and took out the cultivation device. After a long thought, Michael named these devices Olympus. He wore the Olympus around his wrist and willed the system to use the refined arch-energy crystals in the storage. Olympus warmed up slightly as the black device tightened around his wrist. Soon, Michael felt a surge of energy within his body. These refined arch-energy crystals boosted his cultivation power to the core formation level. In a world without energy, a core formation warrior would be a god. Eventually, the giant butterflies descended down to the hilltop, revealing their riders. To Michael's surprise, those who rode the butterflies looked similar to the elves but had brownish skin and pointier ears. Furthermore, they looked primitive. The men wore a piece of a dress made of various leaves around their wrists, covering their manhood, while the women wore leaves covering their breasts and womanhood. Still, the dress made of leaves barely covered them. Even the bows and arrows they had looked ancient and primal. As soon as the wood elves saw Michael, they screamed and raised their hands to the sky. Their eyes were filled with disbelief and shock. They quickly jumped to the mountaintop from the mount and knelt before Michael. Michael saw them knocking their heads against the ground like they were asking for forgiveness. "This isn't the welcome I expected," Sarba whispered. Michael shared the same thought. The wood elves bent their knees and went on with the ground. They didn't even dare to look him in the eyes. He turned his gaze to the elder elf, who wore some kind of hat with feathers and held a staff. With a hunchback and a staff to hold his body straight, the old elf looked like a typical village elder who was wise and old. "Dark Lord," the old elf's voice stuttered. It was not because of his old age but because of the respect and fear he had toward the Dark Lord. The old man trembled even to raise his head before Michael. At that moment, almost 30 wood elves and their mountains knelt before Michael, waiting for him to speak. Since Michael was caught off guard by the god thing in another world, it took him a few moments to find his next words. Never in a million years did Michael think he would find an entirely new world with elves who worship him as their god. "All right. Everyone, stand up," Michael ordered them. The village elder and the other wood elves almost immediately rose to their feet as though they were programmed to obey every one of his commands. Tears gushed out of the village elder's eyes. Even some of the male wood elves sobbed with joy and delight. But deep within their eyes, Michael saw the desperation for help. Some of the elves had deep scars and wounds still covered with green paste. Those marks were perfectly straight, like a sword cut or a spear slash. Michael knew without a doubt that these elves were fighting someone. Judging by their weapons and clothes, anyone with a sword and better armor could slaughter these elves. So unless the elves were fighting unarmed goblins, they had no chance of winning the fight. The old elf tried to remain straight with the help of his staff. "I knew you would answer our prayers, Dark Lord," the old elf said, sobbing uncontrollably. Tears gushed out of the old elf's eyes. Michael pretty much had no idea what was happening. But he took a deep breath and decided to deal with the wood elves, who seemed to worship him with every fiber of their bodies. Even the members of his dark army didn't look as loyal and faithful as these wood elves. Suddenly, Michael heard a thunderous scream in the distance. Suddenly, a red smoke rose to the sky through the forest. The place where the red smoke was coming from was the same place these elves came from. "What is that?" asked Michael, moving his gaze to the red smoke in the distance. "Call for help, Dark Lord," the old elf answered. Intense fear glistened in his old eyes. "We should try helping them." "These elves seem desperate," Iag whispered in Michael's ears. Among the 3 heads, Iag was the least merciful one. But even she felt pity for the elves and wanted to help them. Michael was not going to ignore them when they seemed to worship him as a god. They were like the Dark Army, only more loyal and faithful. "Then I should answer the call for help." Michael slowly ascended into the air as the elves gasped in shock. Their faces went pale. The village elder looked like he was about to have a heart attack. "Lead the way," said Michael, hovering in the air. It took a few moments for the elves to snap back to reality. Then, they climbed onto their mounts and flew toward the red smoke. On their way, they stared at Michael with awe and disbelief. Their expressions were beyond words. On the other hand, Michael was in love with this new world. Everywhere he turned, he saw lush forests with magical birds and sapphire blue trees that glowed like neon lights. The air smelled fresher than any other cultivation continent. Magical was the word that appeared in his mind when looking at the world. The golden butterflies flew through the air like fancy kites. The butterfly with the elder on top flew relatively close to Michael, and eventually, a cozy village built on top of the trees appeared in Michael's sight. Michael was in awe, wondering how these elves managed to build a village around the trees above the ground. The tree houses he saw when he visited the dark elves were a far cry from this village. Through the giant blue trees, Michael vaguely saw a giant wooden pillar where the wood elves gathered around. The source of this content is nov/l/bin/. Net little wood elves bounced up and down, waving their hands, seeing the butterflies in the air. The grown-ups, however, looked tense and clenched their hands together against their chests. They were praying for their god to return. Through the canopy, Michael descended to the ground. Countless wood elves gasped and cried out loud. Just like the village elder and the wood elves accompanied him, the villagers dropped to their knees immediately after seeing Michael. Our God has answered our prayers. We are saved. Dark Lord. The villagers shouted out loud. Looking at them, Michael couldn't help wondering how they quickly identified him as their god. But he soon got his answer when Sarba asked him to turn around. You should see this, Michael heard Sarba's startled voice. As he slowly turned around, he saw a wooden carving of a man in the tall wood pillar. Although the features were not precise, he resembled Michael. The two swords on his back and the hydra on his shoulder were dead giveaway. He turned his back on the wood elves and stared at the wood carving for a few minutes. The wood elves didn't dare to utter a word. As a result, silence returned to the place. Strangely, the carving's eyes were radiating a dim light. When he looked closer into the eyes, Michael noticed a rune in each eye. It was so tiny that an average human or a wood elf wouldn't notice. Finally, Michael turned around to greet the wood elves and hear why they called for help. Michael's gaze swept across the wood elves and landed on the village elder. The village elder raised his head to look Michael in the eyes. Stand up, said Michael. What's your name? Michael asked the elder. Kirat, Dark Lord, the village elder answered with the utmost respect and reverence toward Michael. Michael nodded, flicking his wrist as the throne made of skulls and bones materialized behind Michael. He sat down and put one leg atop the other. The wood elves were once again startled by a simple act such as this. To the wood elves who grew up without arch-energy or cultivation, everything Michael did was nothing short of a miracle. Now tell me why you called for help, Michael asked Kirat. The demons, Dark Lord. We are failing in the fight against the demons. Michael and Vidora were stunned by Kirat's answer. They immediately thought of Azazel and his race. But Michael was skeptical about the demon thing. He never thought the wood elves named the Skyhall soldiers the demons. To be honest, the wood elves didn't even know there was a separate race called demons that existed in the universe. Are these demons here to punish us because of something we did or didn't do, Dark Lord? Are you punishing your children? Michael almost coughed up blood after hearing the elder address themselves as the children. But he had to keep a straight face and go along with this. After all, Godhood did come up with some quirks like this. Besides, it didn't seem like a good idea for them to tell the wood elves the truth about the universe. Instead, Michael planned to be their beloved god. This way, Michael would have an entire population working for him, collecting everything he needs and being loyal to him in exchange for protection. How long have you been fighting these demons? Surprisingly, Cain questioned the elder for some reason. Since 2 years ago, Lord Cain, the elder surprised Michael by addressing Cain using his realm name. Moreover, he came to this world 2 years ago. It seemed like the demon attack and his appearance had some kind of connection. How do they know our name? Iag whispered into Michael's ears. And demons? Are they really fighting the demons? Asked Sarba. Suddenly, Michael sensed someone rushing toward them in his environment scanning. When he looked over the crowd of wood elves, he saw a wood-elven woman land on the wood platform using a rope lift mechanism. "We have to save Taskin," the woman said before collapsing down. Chapter 821, God to the Rescue, Thilv. Michael heard a wood elf cry out loud. Still, the wood elfin, who seemed to be his wife, didn't dare to move without Michael's permission. It was obvious the wood elf who just fainted due to probably blood loss was their loved one, but instead of rushing to her aid, the couple looked at Michael with eyes pleading for mercy. "Kirat, bring her to me," Michael ordered the village elder. The wood elf old man immediately signaled Thilv's parents as they carried Thilv to Michael. The man who carried the woman had a muscular body with several scars, while his wife looked gentle and kind. They both sobbed, seeing the sorry state of their daughter. Thilv had several deep claw marks on her back and a deep stab wound on the side of her chest. Blood spurted out of her wounds, resulting in her body looking pale. Kirat and the wood elves placed Thilv on Michael's feet and knelt before him. "Dark Lord, please save our daughter," they cried out loud. Michael stood up from this throne and took a few steps toward the wounded wood elf. He sat beside her before taking out a sparkling healing potion. Under the wood elf's shocked gazes, he gently opened Thilv's mouth and poured the healing potion into her mouth. The wood elves were no strangers to the healing potions. They saw the Skyhall soldiers use these potions on a battlefield to heal themselves completely. It was one of the many reasons why the wood elves got decimated mercilessly by the demons. The wounds on Thilv's body magically disappeared under their gazes. Her hands twitched slightly as she slowly regained consciousness. Any other normal healing potions would have failed to save her because of the blood loss. But Michael gave her one from his personal stash, which could supplement her blood loss and heal her completely. Ack! Suddenly, Thilv rose up from the floor, gasping for air. It took her vision a few seconds to adjust to the new sight. When everything cleared up, she saw a strange face looking at her. She immediately tried to crawl back and reach for her dagger in utter shock, but Kirat and her parents grabbed her by her hands. "Thilv. Thank the Dark Lord, the source of this content is nov/l/bin/net, my precious." Thilv's mother and father embraced her tightly as the entire tribe looked stunned by Michael's mercy. Michael returned to his throne, letting the family have some warm moments, although he doubted this would last, judging by the wounds on her body. Thilv hugged her parents tight as she sobbed uncontrollably. A few minutes later, Kirat and her parents dropped a nuke on her head. Thilv's face paled when her gaze fell on Michael. The god she had prayed for since she was a little kid was sitting before her. Not a single day passed without Thilv praying to the Dark Lord. It was her true wish that the Dark Lord would appear in front of her one day. But she didn't know it would actually happen. The Dark Lord looked more imposing and radiant than the wood carving. Her heart almost jumped out of her chest when he smiled at her. As much as Thilv wanted to grab his feet and cry out loud, she didn't have time to do so. Taskin was fighting Tar as they spoke. He and her comrades risked their life so she could escape. Realization hit her as the Dark Lord may be the only person who could save her husband. Hence, she dashed at the Dark Lord and dropped to her knees before Michael. She looked up with her hands clenched against her chest. "Please save my husband, Dark Lord." Michael guessed she might put a request like that after he saw the wounds. Luckily for the wood elves, Michael decided to help them. Plus, he was curious to see these demons they talked about. These people had been worshipping him, so the least he could do was help them get some peace. Besides, he felt like it was his duty to protect these people. Perhaps it was their loyalty or the fact they worshipped him, but he wanted to help them. Michael unsheathed a dark sword as the wood elves took a step back. They trembled at the sight of Michael's black sword. He dropped it to the ground and rose from his throne. Thilv still remained at his feet, begging for his help. He stepped on the sword and turned his gaze down on her. "Step onto the sword and hold my hand tight." At first, Thilv was confused but eventually did as she was told. After all, she had no time to waste, and her god had ordered her to climb on the sword. "Dark Lord, please allow us to accompany you," said Kirat, only to see Michael shake his head. "No need. I will be back soon, as he said, the black sword slowly ascended into the air, carrying Michael and Thilv. But before Michael could shoot into the air, Vidora made a request to Michael. We'd like to stay with the villagers. Although Michael was surprised, he didn't see any harm in leaving Vidora with the wood elves. Michael nodded as Vidora jumped back to his throne. After leaving Vidora on the throne, Michael flew straight through the canopy to the sky. Thilv let out a squeal as she grabbed Michael's hands tight. When he rose to the air, Michael saw a colossal tree in the distance. Even the giant bull he saw in the demon's grave would look small in front of this tree. The black smoke rising from the ground near the tree and the castle looked out of place to Michael. Even from afar, Michael could smell the metal and pollution in the air. For a few moments, Michael stopped flying and looked around the world. His blood boiled when he saw countless forest fires and dark smoke rising to the sky. Only a fool would think they happened naturally. He knew that whoever built the castle near the mother tree was responsible for all the destruction. He could only imagine how many precious plants and wildlife the fire had engulfed. Such a waste of resources and destruction of nature raised his killing intent to another level. You might want to hold me tighter, said Michael. Thilv nodded as she grabbed his hands tighter than before. Suddenly, everything around her blurred. Her face ached because of the speed. It was a miracle her leaf dress remained intact when she appeared directly above the encampments, where she saw Taskin and others bleeding to their deaths on the ground. There they are, Thilv pointed her fingers at the ground. To Michael's surprise, an orc was beating the life out of some wood elves. But when he looked closer at the soldiers, he was disappointed and surprised at the same time. The reason for his disappointment was they weren't demons but elves and humans in metal armor. On the ground, Taskin and his men tried to pick themselves up, but Tar had broken their legs with a wooden club. When the duel between Tar and Taskin began, the orc used a pill to enhance his strength to ensure his victory against Taskin. A fair duel would have gone in Taskin's favor, but it was far from a fair duel. At least Taskin managed to use a primitive smoke bomb that blinded Tar and his men temporarily, which gave Thilv enough time to escape into the forest. However, the Skyhall soldiers and the wolves managed almost to kill her. Luckily, they didn't know the forest like Thilv knew. Now, Taskin and his men just hoped Thilv escaped to the tribe. They didn't even want backup because sending backup to save them was equal to sending the wood elves to their death. Taskin's legs looked crooked as Tar slowly walked toward him. The ugly orc had an even uglier smile on his face. Suddenly out of nowhere, a bolt of lightning struck the ground between him and Taskin. Only then did these Skyhall soldiers look up at the sky. When they realized what just had happened, Michael landed on the ground, creating a shock wave that sent the orc flying away. The Skyhall soldiers were terrified as the dark sword slowly descended to the ground carrying Thilv. Give these to them, Michael threw a bunch of healing potions to Thilv like they were candies. Taskin! She cried out loud as she dashed at Taskin. His face was swollen and almost unrecognizable. Because she was with the Dark Lord, Thilv had no fear in her heart. Meanwhile, the Skyhall soldiers looked tense. Before they could react, Michael dashed at Tar. The big ugly orc was trying to pick himself up. Instead of waiting for the orc to stand up, Michael grabbed him by his head and cast the cloud of darkness and death range. The area immediately grew darker, which terrified the soldiers around Michael. The orc groaned. His big green eyes were filled with shock. Without giving the orc any time to retaliate, Michael cast the Soul Eater. Michael could have easily returned the favor by beating the crap out of the orc, but he chose to kill the orc quickly to show his overwhelming powers. After all, Michael had the reputation of a god to protect. The dark smoke shrouded the orc as everyone heard the orc's sickening cry of agonizing pain. His scream echoed through the lands. Soon, the Skyhall soldiers noticed a bright smoke leaving Tar's eyes and going into Michael's mouth. The orc's once bulky monstrous body shriveled under their shocked gazes. When Michael let go of the orc, Tar looked more like a mummy than an orc. Taskin and the others couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. Who is he? Taskin asked with a stuttering voice. Everything that happened before his eyes was nothing short of a miracle. He even thought this was just a dream. Meanwhile, the Skyhall soldiers lost the color of their faces behind the helmets. Some of them outright fell to the ground due to the cloud of darkness effects. Michael slowly turned his gaze to the Skyhall soldiers. Black lightning crackled around his arms, threatening to strike every single soldier in the area. Shall we begin? Michael's words swept across the land and put the fear of God in their hearts. Chapter 8:22 God's Wrath. The Skyhall soldiers who received the name demons from the Wood Elves took a step back. Their eyes shimmered with fear behind their helmets. Michael cracked his finger one by one. His movements were slow but contained deep hatred and killing intent. Despite the morning sun and its brightness, the place darkened when he cast the death range. Michael was already at core formation level 2 because of the Olympus, as the death range boosted his cultivation 4 levels high. Taskin and the others felt a chill running down their spines just by hearing the crackling lightning bolts dancing around Michael. The dark sword on the ground slowly ascended into the air and landed in Michael's hands. As though the sword had sensed Michael's killing lust, it produced a myriad of lightning bolts. In the darkness, the dark swords radiated a dim red light because of the lightning bolts. The Skyhall soldiers were stupefied. They were literally in the dark, having no clue how Michael was using spells and arch-energy in enemies. These soldiers were at the bottom of the Skyhall hierarchy. Hence, they received no artifacts or scrolls that could have helped them escape Michael's wrath. The only option they had was the portal within the castle. But they doubted they would be able to move past him. Kill him, Dark Lord! Thilv shouted like a wounded beast thirsting for payback. The others were too stunned after hearing the human before them was their god. Even Taskin began regaining faith in their god, the Dark Lord. Michael slowly raised his sword toward the sky as the clear sky immediately darkened. Storm clouds as gray as ash came out of thin air, followed by rumbling thunder. Flashes of lightning struck across the sky, indicating the upcoming bloodbath. Then, hundreds of black lightning bolts struck the ground. Thilv and the others quickly closed their eyes instinctively. Soon, they heard screams and felt the electricity in the air. Their neck hair stood up as they tasted blood and metal in the air. The lightning storm continued to strike down, slaughtering the soldiers on the ground. Hundreds of lives were snuffed out in a few minutes. All that remained on the ground was hollow, melted armor, scorched bones, and bits and pieces of the Skyhall soldiers. When Thilv opened her eyes, she couldn't believe her eyes. It took her brain a few moments to process everything that happened. They learned from the village elder that the Dark Lord was a vengeful god, and he lived up to their expectation and more. Gradually, the darkness faded away, letting the sun bathe the ground with its brightness. In the light, the ground looked more terrifying. The ground was littered with the Skyhall soldiers' remains. Michael was happy with the output. These soldiers deserved no mercy nor the right to breathe another day in this beautiful world that belonged to him. Michael turned his gaze back to Thilv and the men. Collect the armor and their weapons, Michael ordered the Wood Elves. Their bodies moved without their consent like robots. With their nimble fingers and hands, they plucked the weapons and armor left behind by the Skyhall soldiers. Most of the armor was melted, just like their weapons. The lightning storm did a number on them. But to a talented blacksmith like Michael, it was not a big deal for him to repair the armor and weapons. The first and foremost thing on his to-do list was fixing the clothing issue. He couldn't have his future army of Wood Elves running around, looking like primitive monkeys. Michael was about to head toward the castle when he heard angry growls from behind. The Wood Elves froze as Michael turned back to see 4 wolves baring their teeth. The wolves were completely stupid and oblivious to the fact Michael could kill them with a flick of his wrist. "Hey kitty," Michael teased the wolves. Step by step, the wolves approached Michael. They surrounded Michael to pounce him from every direction. Suddenly, the wolves leaped at Michael. Then, the Wood Elves saw a ring of dark flames like they had never seen before pulsating from Michael. The dark flames reduced the wolves to ash as their bones crumbled down to the ground before they could reach Michael. He could have killed them using varieties of ways. Some of them were really creative and brutal. But Michael chose to kill the soldiers using the fastest way to show his overwhelming power to the wood elves. He wanted them to witness his power so they would continue to worship him and serve him loyally to their last breath. In exchange, he would protect this world and the residents as he was meant to be. Michael then looked at the sky. For some reason, he felt like his past self was smiling at him. Leaving the wood elves to their task, Michael disappeared from their sight. The wood elves only saw a couple of black lightning bolts in the air, which trailed toward the castle. In a blink of an eye, Michael appeared in the throne hall, moving past all the soldiers outside. Lustrous braziers, half enclosing each of the 10 onyx columns, lit up the lower levels of the throne hall and engulfed the throne hall in a brilliant glimmer. The paintings of vast landscapes on the arched ceiling danced in the flickering light while statues looked down upon the porcelain floor of this regal hall. For a castle built in a hurry, they really put some effort into decorating the throne hall. Michael couldn't help wondering who was the ruler of this castle. He walked toward the noble throne of carved rock that sat 20 or 30 steps above the ground. The throne was covered in hallowed carvings and intricate runes, and fixed on each of the broad ears was a sapphire rose. The light pillows were a light teal, and these too had been adorned with burnished sigils. A teal rug ran from the throne down the center and looped back from both left and right while square dag banners with gilded tassels swung gently from the walls. Between each banner hung a lantern. None but a few have been lit, illuminating the portraits of angels in their perfectly forged armor. Sunlight peeked through the extensive, tinted glass windows edged by veils colored the same teal as the banners. The curtains had been adorned with impressive needlework and emblazoned edges. Michael walked around the throne hall like he owned the place. He could hear the heavy boots clanking as the Sky Hall soldiers rushed into the throne hall. The soldiers were still contemplating what had just happened. A few minutes ago, several things happened at once. First, they were patrolling the castle grounds as usual. Then, they saw the sky darken, followed by a violent lightning storm, something they had never seen before in this world. The lightning storm lasted for a few moments before completely vanishing into thin air. They wanted to check the place, but before they could do it, they saw a strong breeze of wind moving past him. Then, they saw a bolt of lightning heading into the throne hall. To their shock, they saw a human roaming around the throne hall when they entered. They never saw him enter the castle. Still, he was there. The only explanation of how he entered the throne hall was by using a spell that defied the rule of this world. Something was wrong, very wrong. The soldiers could feel it. Since these soldiers were stationed away from the Sky Hall for so long, they didn't recognize Michael as the Dark Lord. The soldiers surrounded Michael with their swords and spears pointed at him. Michael stopped at the bottom of the stairs to the throne and turned back. His eyes searched among the armored soldiers for their leader. He expected someone from a higher rank to appear before him soon. As he expected, a tall man wearing full metal armor walked through the soldiers. He was armed to the teeth. The man slowly removed his helmet, revealing his elven features and striking golden hair. "Who are you?" The elf spoke with a gritty tone that showed no warmth whatsoever. Not that Michael expected the elf to be warm when he was trespassing. If it wasn't for the question of how he entered the castle without their knowledge, Michael was sure the elf would have ordered his men to take him down by now. For a moment, Michael did not give the elf any answer. He kinda kept the elves and the other soldiers in the dark. Then, Michael cracked his neck and knuckles. "You are a human. Aren't you a long way from home?" asked the elf. "So there are humans in this world?" Michael asked the elf slowly. His words confused the elf a bit. What did he mean by "in this world"? The elf questioned himself. As someone who spent more time in Idenese than Michael, the elf knew the humans lived far away in small groups. Unlike the Cultivation continents, humans were a minority here. They rarely traveled outside their tribes. Yet the elf noticed a human roaming around the castle as he owned the place. Furthermore, the elf was still struggling to grasp how he entered the castle and whether he used archenergy or not. "You are trespassing." It's a crime punishable by death, the elf threatened Michael. I could say the same to you, said Michael as the elf frowned. You trespassed my world. So can you blame me for thinking about killing you all? Somehow, the human's words did not feel like an empty threat. Your world? The elf creased his sword-like brows. Someone hasn't done his research. Anyhow, tell the ruler of this place to meet me here, and I will make your deaths as painless as possible, Michael shrugged. Pity he wouldn't get any experience points for killing them, but he at least received badass points. At that moment, he had other concerns, like finding the one who rules this castle. The orc tar served someone, and Michael wanted to know who. In the elf's eyes, the human didn't seem like the person who could be reasoned with or the one who would stand down. He knew a battle was inevitable. As he was about to issue an order to take him down, a majestic voice echoed through the hall. Stand down. Chapter 823, Deal with the Sky Hall. Michael heard the voice from behind. He slowly turned around to see a hunchback old woman with pure white hair appear near the throne. Her hair was tied into a bun, and she wore pearl robes adorned with intricate symbols that shined in the light. The old woman climbed down the stairs without a concern in the world. When the elf and the others noticed the old woman, they immediately bowed. The old woman didn't make any gesture to acknowledge the soldiers. Instead, her gaze was locked on Michael. The soldiers knelt down as their heavy metal clanked against the marble floor. Ghost, the old woman addressed Michael by his name. So you are the ruler of this castle? Michael asked the old woman. Everyone leave, the old woman raised her voice. Her voice sounded like a bell in a silent area. As soon as the soldiers heard the old woman's order, they stood up, turned around, and left the throne hall without a word, leaving Michael and the old woman behind. I am a representative, said the old woman. Then tell your boss to stay out of this world. It belongs to me. Michael looked down to match the old woman's eyes. Although he could kill the old woman with a single look, he refrained himself from doing so. You may have power in this world. But we both know you won't stay here forever. You will return to the dark ocean and eventually step foot off the southern continent, leaving Mugashuka's protection. It is wise for you not to cross my higher-ups if you want to survive, the old woman said. She was nonchalant despite knowing Ghost could end her life in a heartbeat. Michael was slightly surprised. The old woman seemed to know more about him. Obviously, she was someone with knowledge about him. Careful with the tone, Grandma. I can still kill you with a snap of my fingers, said Michael. The old woman just let out a gentle smile. You can, but you won't. Unless you want the Sky Hall to be at your doorsteps, you will refrain from harming any more of my soldiers, said the old woman. Typical Sky Hall. Don't think I don't know your little act of harvesting netherils and demon skeletons. Also, if the Sky Hall had really wanted me gone, the war would have started already. But here we are. So what does that tell you? Your boss doesn't want me dead for some reason. Michael was just making a guess here. He didn't know he was spot on. As he said, Andor, the god of time and space and the man who controlled the Sky Hall behind the scene, did not want Michael dead. Instead, he was manipulating the events to put Noah and Michael against each other. For him to escape the immortal realm, he needed a god dead. Since the past Dark Lord beat him to near death, Andor hoped the dead god would be Michael at the end of their battle. If you don't cut off your infected arm, you will die. Just like, you are an infection to all worlds. Some people are the infected arm. The Sky Hall must do what's necessary to keep the body alive. Nice way to justify genocides and to slaughter innocent people. None who helps you is innocent. The old woman saw lightning bolts appear around his wrist. They crackled, hissing like coiling snakes to shoot her down. Only one thing stopped Michael from ending the old woman's life: his instincts and the system's warning in his head. For some reason, the system went crazy when an urge to kill the old woman appeared in his heart. Michael took a deep breath as the crackling lightning bolts disappeared. By the looks of it, we both have to do what we don't like, said the old woman. And what that might be? Coexists in this world. You can kill anyone, but eventually, you will leave this world. Are you willing to gamble on the wood elves' lives that we won't bring the wrath of Sky Hall after you're gone? As much as he hated to admit it, the old woman was right. He wouldn't be able to protect the wood elves forever by staying with them. Judging by the old woman's look in her eyes, he could tell she had some kind of deal to strike with him. Why do I feel like you're about to propose a deal? Asked Michael as the old woman chuckled. Indeed I am. It is a simple one, actually. There is a land that the locals call the Ash Field, far south of here. You agree to give that land to us, and we will stop our war against the locals. What's important about that place? Asked Michael, only to see the old woman shake her head. You don't have to know. Do not forget we are not allies. On the contrary, we are enemies preparing to face each other in the future. Unlike you, we aren't the gods here. You are. So you have to protect your flock. Michael knew the old woman would have already guessed he would spy on them if he agreed to the deal. But still, the old woman wanted to strike this deal, which made Michael more curious about this ash field. What's about this place that made the Sky Hall negotiate with me, the Dark Lord? Michael questioned himself. Deep down, Michael knew agreeing to this deal was the right thing to do. He could use the time to learn more about this world, especially the ash field, and make the wood elves and all who worship him stronger. Once he was done with the wood elves, they would chase away any invader who stepped into this magical land without his help. To do that, he needed time. Unfortunately, making this deal was the only way he would get more of it. Do we have a deal? Asked the old woman. As you said, we both have to do things we don't like. But, Michael raised a finger. If any of your soldiers ever stepped a foot outside this ash field, you won't deal with Ghost. You will deal with the Dark Lord. The place darkened as Michael said. For the first time, a sliver of fear emerged in the old woman's eyes. And when I visit this place tomorrow, I don't want to see any more of your soldiers. As he finished his sentence, Michi turned around and walked away from the old woman. There was nothing for him to learn more from the old woman. After Michael left the castle, he noticed the Sky Hall soldiers standing in a line, blocking his path. But soon, the elf captain signaled the soldiers to clear the path for him. When Michael noticed the elf, his eyes burned with rage and killing lust. If Michael was a betting man, he would say the elf had learned what had happened to his precious men. Michael didn't say anything to antagonize the man. He didn't think it was worth it. This isn't over, the elf mumbled, just loud enough for Michael to hear him. You better hope so, said Michael before disappearing from their sight. This time, the soldiers confirmed their suspicions. He is using spells. The elf was speechless, but that didn't reduce his anger toward the human by any means. After leaving the castle, Michael returned to where he had left the wood elves behind. By the time Michael arrived, the wood elves had gathered around a pile of metal armor and weapons. The wood elves immediately dropped to their knees when they saw Michael. Even Taskin, who had previously lost his faith in his god, seemed completely turned to his old ways. They will leave this place tomorrow. This battle with them is over, but we have yet to win the war, said Michael. Vidora and the villages were waiting for Michael's return. Meanwhile, the wood elves bathed Vidora with everything Iag asked for. The Hydra sat on Michael's throne and asked for every fruit the wood elves had for themselves. The wood elven ladies particularly fell in love with the cute yet terrifying creature that accompanies their god. They spared no expense in showering the Hydra with love and reverence, especially after Iag gave her word that Michael would heal the wounded. The sun slowly descended on the horizon, painting the blue sky with its golden rays. Every tree and plant life in the forest radiated dazzling lights. Darkness brought the real beauty of Idnes. Vidora saw the forest light up as the entire forest seemed magical. Even Cain was in awe of the beauty. With the trees and plants being a natural light source, the wood elves did not need any torches to brighten their village. What's taking him so long? Sarba asked his siblings. He was worried. If you ask me, I'd say he's exploring this world and collecting herbs and stuff. I saw how his eyes lit up when we first arrived in this world, said Iag. She was indeed right. Michael was collecting herbs and exploring the magical forest as they spoke. That's the reason for his lateness. Look! A child's shout broke Sarba's focus on Iag. Karat limped toward the wood platform's edge and saw Michael and Tazkin's men. They are back, Thilv's mother bounced up and down in joy like a child. Eventually, Vidora saw Michael land on the platform as the wood elves knelt down to show him their respect. He just casually waved at them, wordlessly ordering them to rise. Then, he came to the throne and sat beside them. Something's wrong, Iag said, looking at the dark lines on his forehead. What is it? Asked Sarba. I made a deal with Skyhall, said Michael. Chapter 824. A cool god. Michael took Vidora and flew away from the village built on the trees. He came to a mountain cliff where he first appeared in this world. The forest glistened like a neon city with flocks of magical flying beasts decorating the sky in the distance under the starry sky. Looking at the mother tree in the distance, Michael told Vidora everything that had transpired in the castle. After listening to Michael's story, all three heads agreed that making a deal with the old woman was the right thing to do. Otherwise, Michael would be in a constant war in this world too. For a change, Michael wanted some peaceful time here. But he couldn't have peace with the Skyhall soldiers running around. Good thing we have drones and spiders to spy on them when they are in the ash field, said Sarba. But we have to be careful. They know we will do that. Still, they are going for it. It could only mean one thing: they can hide whatever is there from our eyes, said Kane. Time flew past as Michael discussed every aspect of their plan with Vidora. He had to say that it was a wonderful conversation. A while later, Michael tried to contact Gaia, but he couldn't connect to her. The system asked way too many badass points, which Michael outright rejected. Wherever Gaia was, he trusted her to handle herself well. Gradually, Michael felt the exhaustion getting to him as he fell down to take a long nap. He only remembered closing his eyes. By the time he opened them, he saw the sun rising on the horizon. This morning he woke up the same as every day, stretching his muscles. Despite being in a different world, he got up, freshened up, and waltzed into the forest to take a calm morning walk. There was a gentle breeze, creating the single sound of rustling leaves. The leaves appeared as though they were dying to fall out of the tree and join their companions on the forest floor. Together with pine needles and other colorful flora, the leaves formed a thick, springy carpet for him to walk upon. A lazy mist hazed his vision, making the forest and the horizon seem like one from a storybook. The forest around him was imperturbable, as if it was keeping a secret hidden deep within itself. Walking underneath the shade of the trees, he found himself appreciating the scent of these new alien trees. Encompassed by the thick, heavy air, he watched as a single bird that looked like a sparrow fluttered high above the cyan forest. A few feet next to him was an eager red-furred monkey hastily scampered from tree to tree, awaiting the chill of winter. The forest, he realized, was home to many magical creatures he had never seen in his life before. In giving protection and food, the forest was gladly rewarded with the company of these animals. The forest was pure and clean, as though it had never been disturbed by man and his vicious life-killing machines. Luckily, the alchemy book he bought from the system included the wildlife in this world. Otherwise, Michael would have failed to tell the difference between a poisonous plant to a medicinal herb. Some of the glowing mushrooms seemed toxic as hell. Michael collected all of them one by one for future experiments. After mastering all the formulas that exist in the world, he was researching new potions and pills. He had collected hundreds of herbs on his way to the village. When he arrived at the outskirts, Michael simply leaped into the air and landed right beside his throne. The villagers knelt down when they saw him. "You do not have to kneel down every time you see me," said Michael. Their kneeling became quite tiring so quickly. "Isn't this our duty, Dark Lord?" Karat asked Michael as he shook his head. "There is nothing more dangerous than having blind faith in someone, Karat. You are not mindless creatures. Keep your faith and loyalty toward me in your heart. That's enough for me. I do not expect you all to kneel down every time you see me," said Michael. One of the many reasons Xianxia and the Sky Hall were so hell-bent on killing him was how Xianxia witnessed a future where people had no free will. Contrary to what she saw, Michael wanted everyone in the world to be free. If the Sky Hall and the Guardian Guild hadn't tried to kill him and imprison him, Michael's aim would have been just getting stronger and living his life to the fullest. In a way, they pushed him to be the Dark Lord. So every step of the way, Michael had been cautioned that he wouldn't turn into something Xianxia said he would. Besides, if he had accepted the Wood Elves behaving like robots, their individual traits and talents might not come to light. Exploring their talents was just as important as exploring this world to Michael. The Wood Elves reluctantly nodded and raised to their feet. Then, Michael lazily sat on his throne with his gaze fixed on Karat. "How's the wounded doing?" Michael asked the elder elf. "They are alive thanks to you, Dark Lord," said Karat. "So, what's your day-to-day life like? What did you people do all day before they invaded your land?" Michael was curious to learn about their day-to-day life. They had no fancy cities, arch-energy, and evil cultivators to disturb their daily life. So Michael wondered how they passed their time. "Oh," the old elf's eyes lit up, "we wake up, tend to the forest, teach the children our ways, collect fruits and vegetables from the forest, and send gifts to the nearby tribes. But most of our time is spent before your statue, praying and talking to you about our lives. You can talk to me now." Taskin, Michael turned his gaze toward Taskin. He had a feeling this particular wood elf has something in his mind. Although Michael had a pretty good idea about it, he wanted to hear from Taskin himself. The moment Michael gestured at Taskin to step forward, Karat's heart started to pound against his chest. Taskin was one of the few elves who lost their faith in the Dark Lord after the demons invaded their world. "Speak your mind, Taskin. I am a cooler god than you think," Michael reassured the wood elf with a gentle smile. Taskin looked a bit reluctant at first, but seeing everyone's gazes were fixed on him, he sighed and decided to ask the one question that kept him awake many nights. "When the demons invaded us and slaughtered thousands of our people, we prayed to you non-stop. But what did we do not to deserve your kindness and mercy then, Dark Lord? Are you questioning our god, Taskin?" Karat's face twitched when he saw Taskin question Michael. But Michael shut him up with a wave of his hand. The wood elves who heard Taskin felt chill running down their spine. The Dark Lord, they learned from the notes, was not a cooler god, as he said. In stark contrast, he was a vengeful one. Thilv trembled, but Michael calmed their nerves with a smile. "Do you see these scars, Taskin?" Michael asked Taskin, pointing at countless scars riddling his body. Taskin nodded. "I wasn't born with these scars, Taskin. Each of them has a story to it." "You are very wrong if you think gods have no enemies." Karat's jaw dropped a bit when he heard the Dark Lord. "There are many worlds out there, each more powerful and dangerous than yours. I am at war with the demons you fought here, but what you've seen is not even a fraction of their power or what they could do," the wood elves behind Taskin gasped. "Let me simplify this. Out there, each of them could use what you call magic. Some of them are as powerful as I am at this point. When you were fighting your war, I was fighting my own. But if I have to fight two wars at the same time for my people, I will gladly do it." Michael's words brought tears to many eyes. The wood elves sobbed, feeling the radiance from his words. "First, I have to prepare you for the future before us. Like it or not, this is just a temporary peace, and we will fight them in the future, and we will fight for you, Dark Lord." Thilv stepped forward and gave Michael her word. "You have to. Not because I ask you to, but because if they win, the world we know will disappear forever," Michael warned them. The world he saw a glimpse of was still haunting his dreams. There was no doubt in Michael's mind higher powers were working against him. For instance, the one the past Dark Lord warned him about, the one who would get stronger if he slaughtered the beasts in the demon's grave. Another example would be Mugashuko and the one Dark Queen he serves. She was not only a threat to his universe but to multiple universes. Any one of them could be the reason for the future Xianxia witness. One thing was certain in Michael's mind: he was not responsible for that world she saw. Everything Taskin and the Wood Elves thought about the Dark Lord changed in a blink of an eye. They never expected the almighty Dark Lord to have enemies who could challenge him. Nonetheless, their faith in the Dark Lord only increased after he explained why he hadn't answered their prayers, not the other way around. Now that I am here, I will give you something that will let you directly talk to me. You will be able to contact me whenever you want. This way, what happened wouldn't happen again, said Michael as the Wood Elves gasped in surprise. Did my words satisfy you, Taskin? Michael asked the Wood Elf. To be honest, Michael saw great potential in Taskin and Thilv. They could be his first subordinates in this magical world. But first, he needed to know their resolve and will to serve him. Please forgive me if I said anything wrong, Dark Lord, Taskin lowered his head. Not at all. I like when my people speak their minds. In the future, if you want to ask or say anything, do not hold back. Even a god can learn much from mortals, said Michael. Taskin and Thilv's eyes watered, seeing how down-to-earth their god was despite how powerful he was. As Thilv was standing with her watery eyes, Michael turned his gaze toward her. Thilv, I heard you have a map of this forest. Can I see it? Yes, of course, Dark Lord. Thilv bobbed her head up and down frantically before running into one of the wooden huts. A few seconds later, she came back with a big round white leaf. On its surface, Michael saw a roughly drawn map of this forest. System, locate what we need in this map, Michael asked the system. Soon, Michael saw a glow in the map far north from their tribe. It's time to make gold coins rain, Michael chuckled inside. Chapter 825 Han Torum and the God of Light Eye. A few days ago, back on the Aur continent, Gaia was preparing to attend the auction organized by the Han Torum. This auction was not like a typical aqua auction. Instead, the Han Torum auction had only one weapon to sell. Only those who had the invitation could enter the premises. At that moment, Gaia was not in her usual black robes or armor. On the contrary, she chose fancy clothes fit for a princess and a queen. If the dwarves suspected something amiss, they would call off the auction, and she must not let that happen. She needed to play the role of a wealthy heir until she learned more about the devastating weapons the dwarves had recently built. He should have a good reason for not talking to me. Gaia laid flat on the queen-sized bed and looked at the empty space beside her. She had been staying in Delgarum, the dwarven kingdom, in a high-end inn. The room had everything a rich noble could ask for, but Gaia felt lonely without Michael. She preferred a cabin with him over a castle without him. Her loneliness grew every day that went without his voice. Rolling on the bed, she kept looking at the engagement ring on her finger. The curtains covering the windows added an orange glow to the morning light. It reminded Gaia of the times she slept in a beach hut, cuddling Michael and watching the ocean emerge under the golden shimmer. For a moment, her mind conjured the rhythmic waves, soft on the sandy shore, and felt her heartbeat to the same slow pace. She breathed in deeply. A new day had begun. My lady, it's time for you to leave the bed and get ready for the auction. Gaia heard Azazel's voice in her head like an annoying alarm. All right, Gaia exhaled heavily. She reached her hand out to the fabric, noticing how up close the light poured through every open space between fibers, no different from how it once came through the beach hut walls, illuminating like brilliant fireflies each dawn. The blanket was warm beneath her fingers, and when the sun flooded the room, repainting the colors, she felt a little of those golden rays soak into her skin. Finally, Gaia left the bed to take a bath in the bathroom attached to the room. Almost after 30 minutes, Gaia exited the room, wearing the silky smooth bath towel Michael gave her. Then, with a flick of her wrist, she adorned the elegant noble dress Michael brought her from the system for occasions such as this one. The mirror before her reflected the dress, covering only a small portion of her shoulders and flowing down into a fancy queen and neckline. It was a tight fit that put the focus on her breasts but in a graceful manner. Her arms were only covered at her shoulders. A choice that added to the elegance and grace of the dress. The elegant black dress waist was thin, but it was a loose fit. A bow had been wrapped around her, resting gently on her lower back. Below the waist, the dress fitted snugly around her and had an accordion style. The dress reached just below her knees and was longer at the sides and back of the dress. She was wearing open toes, which added simplicity and elegance. To top it all off, she wore a subtle necklace and several elegant bracelets. Before leaving the room, Gaia double-checked the teleportation scrolls and the APD around her wrist. After making sure everything was in place, Gaia left the cozy room. By the time she reached the bustling street of Delgaram, a carriage was waiting for her. The carriage was owned and manned by someone from the Dark Lord's army. "Shall we go, my lady?" asked the middle-aged man in the driver's seat. Gaia nodded as the horses galloped toward her destination. Apparently, Hontorum dwarves chose a drama theater in the entertainment district. Because most of the dwarves couldn't fly without a flying sword, they banned flying inside the city. Thus, Gaia and all others had to use other means of transportation, such as carriages. While the carriage was on its way to the entertainment district, Gaia took out a tablet-sized mirror from her space ring. "Azazel, get me Sadie and Arya," Gaia said before casting a soundproof barrier around her. Soon, the dark mirror flickered as the faces of Arya and Sadie appeared in the mirror side by side. "My lady, Dark Queen," Sadie and Arya lowered their heads, bowing toward Gaia. "Arya, how was the recon?" asked Gaia. "As we expected, the place was crawling with Hontorum dwarves. You can recognize them with the big ruby rings on their fingers. I suspect the auction will happen under the theater. When I was there, I saw 2 dwarves guarding the stairs. They had some kind of contraption near them, like a lever," Arya reported to Gaia. "Did they suspect you?" Arya shook her head. "No. I had the advantage of blending with the crowd. What about humans? Normally I'd assume a tall human like you would stand out in a crowd full of dwarves. The entertainment district is surprisingly diverse, my lady. Except for the elves, you can see almost every race there. Of course, the majority of them were dwarves, but I had enough orcs and humans to blend with," said Arya. "That's because Delgaram is holding an annual think tank," Sadie interjected as Gaia turned her focus to the Silvermoon girl. "You mean a gathering where all the races come to Delgaram to show their inventions?" Gaia asked as Sadie nodded. Gaia had heard about the think tank and even knew some of the Naga ministers who wanted to participate in this think tank. While she was in Nagaland, Gaia always advocated against participating in it because she didn't like the idea of their innovations going public. Therefore, Gaia chose not to participate, just like the elves. But now that Zanali and her mother were in charge, that would soon change. "Rumor has it that the dwarves received some interesting blueprints this year," said Sadie. "Did you hear anything about the man who invented the Death Kiss crossbows? Whoever it is, they are extremely good at hiding their steps. My girls are working day and night on this, and they came up with nothing. But my lady, I suspect there is more about this than it meets the eye." "What do you mean?" "The same time you met the orcs and came across those crossbows, a guardian carriage had entered and left the kingdom in a hurry," a light bulb lit in Gaia's head. She had indeed seen a carriage with the Guardian Guild symbol painted on it when she was trailing Valmos. Initially, she suspected Noah to be in the kingdom. But Sadie's little birdies came up with nothing. Moreover, Sadie's spies in Pentown informed her that Noah was with his family at that time. So Gaia didn't pay much mind to the carriage. She had too many things on her plate to trail the carriages, as according to Sadie, there was more than one carriage. "You think one of those carriages might have transported the inventor?" "We can't deny it, my lady. I am working on turning a guardian to the dark side. Once I am done, we might know more about him." Gaia noticed a strange glow in Sadie's eyes. It was like a tigress on her way to a hunt. Obviously, turning people to the dark side thrilled Sadie, and if she managed to turn a guardian to their side, it would be a huge help in the future. Buying guardians with gold coins used to be so easy when Noah was not the supreme guardian. After he took the helm, he launched an extensive investigation and fired all the corrupted guardians. Now finding a corrupt guardian was as rare as finding a gold coin on the street. "Be careful. Don't fly too close to the sun. If you feel something is wrong, back off. Noah tends to give us surprises. I will, my lady, also, keep an eye on the Winston Manor. I have a strange feeling about that, as you wish, my lady, Sadie agreed with a nod as Gaia turned her gaze back to Arya. Arya, I want you to cover all the exits from the theater. I don't think we have enough coins to win the auction. So we have to trail whoever wins the auction and get our hands on the weapon. My people are already covering the exits as we speak, my lady. Unless they use teleportation scrolls, we can trail them the moment they step outside the theater, said Arya. Don't worry about teleportation. Elidar will take care of that. Elidar had already reached the theater, and engravings runes around the theater to prevent anyone from using teleportation scrolls. The runes would stay inactive until someone tries to use a scroll. Stopping someone from using a teleportation scroll was much easier than tracking them down after they had used one. Gaia left no stone unturned in this plan. Because failure was not an option. If those weapons had the capability to turn the tide of war, the Dark Army needed to have them on their side. After dismissing Arya and Sadie, Gaia contacted Azazel as he appeared in the mirror. My lady, Azazel bowed. Tell Saber to send one of his people to shadow Sadie. If the Guardians are digging a hole to trap her, I want her safe. Sadie was too valuable to lose. So Gaia wanted to keep her hidden and safe from the Guardians. If the Guardians found out she is working for the Dark Lord, their dreams of controlling the Silver Moon and building a web of spies would crumble to dust. Following Sadie's matter, Gaia had one more thing to deal with before turning her full focus on the Han Torum dwarves. Have you heard from Mother Yer? Asked Gaia. While Saber was in the Nether Realm, collecting rare herbs for Michael, Adelia was tasked to shadow the elves who cursed Christopher and imprisoned Claire's mother. She was ordered to rescue Claire's mother by any means necessary by the Dark Lord himself. She has reached Nelnithor and is getting close to the Mortero family. She also asked me to keep an eye on you, my lady, Gaia smiled, and I would ask you the same. Keep an eye on her. I want and can't lose her again. I will talk to her after this auction. At that point in time, Gaia had no idea the surprise Noah had for all of them. Chapter 8:26 Han Torum and the God of Light 2. The entertainment district of Embercrest was filled with all sorts of people except the rich. Once again, the dwarves tend to care little about status among their own race. One could see a millionaire dwarf drink and sing in a pub with his buddies, who might very well be minors. It was very difficult for people to tell the difference between a rich dwarf and a poor dwarf. After a long smooth ride, Gaia's carriage reached the theater. From the outside, it looked rustic, beautiful, and cheerful. Clay bricks and carved pillars made up most of the building's outer structure. It was difficult to see through the curtained windows, but the liveliness from within could be felt outside. Park the carriage nearby and wait for my word, Gaia said to the driver and stepped out of the carriage. A wide straight avenue littered with dwarves welcomed Gaia. As Arya said, Gaia noticed many orcs, humans, and beastmen on the street. Thanks to those, she didn't stand out among the dwarves, and the short bushy beard species didn't raise an eyebrow as they would if she had visited the place later this year. 20 or so marble stairs led to the theater door flanked by 2 dwarves in silver armor and war hammers with intricate engravings. HRRM, the dwarves growled under their breath when they saw Gaia's long legs. Hate toward the taller species was evident in their eyes as the dwarves opened the door for Gaia. As she entered the theater through the decorated metal door, she was welcomed by dancing thespians and excitement. It was as charming inside as it was on the outside. Rounded stone beams supported the upper floor and the huge lamps attached to them. The walls were decorated with mounted animal heads, shields, and portraits of various dwarves. The theater itself was packed. As one would expect, dwarves were the primary clientele here, which often meant great company and chaos. Several long tables were occupied by beastmen. Humans and a few orcs occupied the other, smaller tables who seemed to be enjoying themselves a lot, especially the dancers. The center stage was built several meters higher than the ground but not too high to ache one's neck. Several female dancers, including beastmen women and human women, danced gracefully, wearing revealing clothes. The air reeked of freshly brewed ale. It was almost overwhelming. Everywhere Gaia turned, she saw the dwarves drinking, laughing, and fighting like it was no one's business. This behavior didn't surprise Gaia much, as the dwarves were unruly creatures with unpredictable behavior. Gaia's gaze swept across the theater and noticed a few humans walking toward the two dwarves guarding the stairs. That must be the entrance, Gaia said to herself before squeezing through the crowd toward the dwarves. She had to be careful not to step on any dwarves on her way because there were several of them rolling on the ground. For a Great Eight clan, Han Torum picked an unusual spot for the auction. Gaia took out the invitation with a flick of her wrist and held it in her hand. The dwarves noticed the approaching human and the golden invitation in her hand. Here you go, Gaia extended the invitation for the dwarves to see the embossed letters on the invitation. The two dwarves gawked at the invitation from top to bottom. Then, they removed the red rope blocking the stairs leading downstairs. Golden lamps brightly lit the steps and led Gaia to a spacious hall under the theater. Only a few people remained in the hall. The marble floor shimmed under the bright chandelier light. Crimson-red curtains woven with elegant designs covered the windows and the walls. When she entered the hall, a human girl wearing an alluring red dress that hugged her perfect hourglass structure came to greet Gaia. She was one of the thespians and was assigned to be the auctioneer. My lady, the red-haired beauty bowed toward Gaia. Please enjoy the beverages and make yourself at home. The auction will begin shortly, said the beauty. She tried to avoid gazing at Gaia's dress but failed miserably. Her eyes sparkled. But Gaia was more focused on the others in the room. To her surprise, she noticed a few orcs along with the beast men. As for humans, there were 4 in the room. Among the 4, 2 of them wore white robes with the iconic Guardian Guild symbol engraved on their chests. Avoiding their gazes, Gaia made her way to the long oak table with silver plates filled with snacks, fruits, and beverages such as ale, wine, and beer. How are you doing? When Gaia came to the table, a woman with fluffy fox ears greeted her. The woman's tail slowly swayed left and right as she sipped the wine from the golden chalice. Good. What about you? Gaia greeted the golden-haired woman with a gentle smile. To avoid looking out of the place, Gaia took an empty glass, poured red wine, and pretended to drink it. I couldn't help but adore your dress, the woman complimented Gaia's dress. Gaia was no stranger to fake compliments, but the woman's words were genuine. Any woman with a tad bit of taste in clothes would kill to get a dress like the one Gaia was wearing. It was a pity that Gaia didn't know why people had been glaring at her dress the moment she stepped out of the carriage. If anything, this dress was drawing too much attention toward her. My fiancé gave this to me, said Gaia. He must have good taste in clothing. Oh, pardon my manners. I am Calibra, the beast woman introduced herself, reaching out to shake Gaia's hand. For a moment, Gaia stared at her in surprise. Aren't you a bit too friendly when we are all here to bid for weapons? Asked Gaia, but she shook her hand anyways. She followed Michael's words of making allies anywhere you can instead of enemies. We ladies have to stick together. What's the worst that could happen by making some friends? Calibra shrugged. Calibra's cute and cuddly look may fool the others but not Gaia. She could identify a killer when she saw one, and Calibra was a predator despite her foxy ears. Gaia had a feeling that Calibra may have sensed the same. No one would send an innocent to a black auction that deals in destructive weapons, especially not the Beast King Zelik. Look at them going, Calibra's gaze fell on the Guardians. Why do they want to participate in this auction when their new Supreme Guardian brags about stopping wars? Judging by Calibra's tone, it was apparent the fox hates the Guardian Guild. Although they seemed to share the same hatred toward the Guardian Guild, Gaia remained silent. She was here to track down the buyer and the weapon, not to bitch about the guild and Noah with this total stranger. While Gaia was waiting for the auction to begin, she received another shock. The orcs who bought the Death Kiss crossbows entered the hall with their red-skinned leader leading them. Once the orcs entered the hall, an uneasy atmosphere surrounded them. Everyone, including the green orcs, tried not to make any direct eye contact with them. Luckily for Gaia, she changed her face using the mask. Otherwise, they might have recognized her and suspected something was amiss. None seemed to have any idea about these orcs. But whoever they were, they had deep pockets and connections to bid for the weapon and receive an extra invitation from Han Torum. "Excuse me for a moment, Miss Calubra." Gaia excused herself away from Calubra and went to the corner. "Azazel, are you getting this?" The spider hidden in her hair crawled onto her shoulder and sent the feedback to Azazel, where he recorded everything. "The same ones who bought the crossbows." "It seems like we have new players, my lady," Azazel amused. "The question is, where do they stand when it comes to the Dark Lord? Put their faces in a recording crystal and send them to the elf. He might have some idea," Gaia said to Azazel in a husky voice. Even after Michael had revealed himself as the Dark Lord, the business relationship between him and Lord Information remained untethered. The elf preferred gold coins and favors more than anything. As long as he got paid, Lord Information gave no shit about where the coins came from. The only problem, however, was accessing the elf. After Noah took the mantle, he put surveillance on almost every information broker in the world, and Lord Information was on top of that list. Luckily, Michael had built drones and spiders that could connect Lord Information to Azazel. "We will find out soon enough, ladies and gentlemen," Gaia heard the hostess' voice after a few clinking sounds. The hostess stood in the center with a wine glass raised above her eye line. Everyone turned their focus on the hostess as red sofas materialized around her one by one. The door Gaia came through closed from the outside, trapping them inside. "Please take your seats. The auction will begin now," the hostess gestured at the sofas as everyone plunged into the comfy cushion. Calubra and Gaia went to the center and sat beside each other, facing the red orcs. After everyone comfortably took their seats, the chandelier above them brightened. Gaia recorded everything around her with the spider while waiting for the Han Torum dwarves to appear. At the moment, there were no dwarves in the room. That soon changed when the hall they were in split open, revealing an underground passage. The cushions trembled as a platform moved upwards, carrying the dwarves and their new contraption, a cow-sized weapon with a conical body. Its metal body was painted with gold and engraved with intricate designs. At first sight, it did not look like a weapon to anyone but a saxophone. Of course, the natives of this world didn't know what a saxophone looked like. "Is that the weapon?" Gaia asked herself. Unlike Calubra, Gaia didn't seem disappointed. She knew better than to judge a weapon by its look. The Guardians and the Red Orcs wouldn't be here if the weapon was not powerful enough to cause mass destruction. Chapter 8:27 Han Torum and the God of Light 3. The two dwarves stood beside the unusual weapon and glanced at their audience briefly. They were like any other typical dwarves, bushy beards, bulky bodies, and smelled like ale. One had a receding forehead, while the other looked young with black curly hair. Everyone in the hall was able to see the weapon clearly. Now they all wanted to see what it could do before they started bidding. As though the dwarves had sensed their curiosity, they introduced themselves without taking any more of their time. "I am Bufug, and my partner is called God Dun," the young dwarf introduced himself and his partner. "I know no one gives a shit about our names. So let's go straight to the demonstration. Shall we?" Bufug's gaze swept across the hall. Their names seemed fake to Gaia. No one in their right mind would give their real names when they were supposedly auctioning a mass destruction weapon. However, the dwarves were right. She didn't give two shits about their names. All she needed was to see what this weapon before her was capable of. "Before we do that, we should tell them that this is only the prototype of the real beast," said God Dun, the old dwarf. "What do you mean a prototype?" the red orc growled. "Means we don't want any of you to pull a damn surprise on us. Make no mistake. The real beast is 100 times more powerful than this one. So wait till after the demonstration," said God Dun. He wasn't afraid of the big brute orc despite the fact the orc could kill him with a single punch. The cultivation power between them was huge. God Dun, the dwarf, was at the core formation level, while the orc was at the fusion stage. Nonetheless, the orc remained seated without resorting to violence. Just like everyone else, they wanted to see what the prototype was capable of. Once you see the demonstration and finish bidding, we will take you to the real thing in a more secured area. Gaia's plans slightly changed after hearing about the dwarves. Initially, she thought the dwarves would bring the weapon to the auction. Now, the dwarves took a turn and only brought the prototype. Because of this change, she had to follow the dwarves and the one who won the auction to the real weapon and steal it from the dwarves. She hoped either the human couple or Calibra would win against the guardians and the orcs. Among all of them, they looked least threatening with their core strengthening cultivation level. To start the demonstration, we need a volunteer, said God Dun. Luckily, we do have, not one. Bufug raised a finger, not two, he raised another finger. One by one, he raised all of his fingers, but 5 lucky volunteers. God Dun clapped his hands as the door on the other side of the hall slowly creaked open, revealing a group of people bound by their legs with iron chains. The group was surprisingly diverse. They had 1 orc, 3 humans, and a beastman who had the body of a bear and the face of a man. Move your asses, the 2 dwarves behind them poked the human with his battle axe, pushing into the hall. Calibra raised her brows in shock. Not because she saw one of her kind but because everyone in the group was at the core strengthening stage. The iron chains tied around their legs and arms didn't seem magically enhanced with runes. Rather, they looked ordinary. Which led them to question why they were not trying to get out of their chains. The 2 dwarves led them into the hall and made them stand facing the wide end of the conical weapon. There was at least 7 meters distance between the group and the weapon. Whatever they did, they sure didn't earn the dwarves' empathy. The human tried to tell the other something but couldn't speak through the cloth tied around his mouth. Everyone in the group had their mouths shut by a piece of cloth. Now pieces of shits, listen to me and do exactly what I tell you to do. Try something funny, and you know what will happen to your precious loved ones, Bufug threatened the group in his gruff dwarven voice. The hatred in Bufug's eyes burned brightly like a campfire in pitch-black night. It made Gaia wonder what the group really did to piss the dwarves this much. But whatever they did, it was not her job to find out and rescue them. The guardians were literally sitting there and watching this happen. Even if Michael was there instead of Gaia, he wouldn't have raised a finger when the guardian who was supposed to do something was standing there doing nothing. Meanwhile, God Dun walked back to the weapon and fiddled with the knob attached to the side of the weapon. Everyone was so focused on what the weapon could do that they barely gave a shit about the group facing the weapon head-on. Cast your most powerful defense spells when we take away the piece of cloth. Do you understand? Bufug asked as the 2 dwarves standing behind the group gave everyone a stern kick to their knees to bring them down to match their height. Even after they brought everyone down, the orc was still taller than the dwarves, which garnered some laughter among the participants. Gaia glanced at the red orc and his group to see if they would react to dwarves beating one of their own. But no, the orcs didn't even flinch an eye. It didn't surprise Gaia after she noticed the expressionless faces of the guardians. Eventually, the dwarves removed the clothes and let them get back to their feet. The dwarves waited with their battle hammers clenched tight just in case. Then, Bufug threatened them once again. Remember the faces of your loved ones and cast the strongest defense spell on your arsenal, said Bufug. Everyone in the group felt reluctant and afraid to cast the spell, but eventually, they broke under the dwarf's murderous gaze. Then, they all cast their defense spell one by one. Starfire Rain, one of the humans cast the spell as countless glistening stars appeared around him, forming a bright barrier. Static Flare, suddenly, a crimson-red light flashed across the hall when the beastmen cast the spell. The temperature in the room rose by a couple of degrees. As the spell's name suggested, a barrier made of red rays appeared around the beastman. Deflection Flash, Repose Barrier. A few moments later, everyone had a shield around them. The others, including Gaia, couldn't help looking at the scene curiously. The 2 dwarves who stood behind the group quickly ran toward Bufug and joined their fellow dwarves. In Gaia's eyes, the 2 dwarves seemed terrified. She could see the fear creeping down their spines through their eyes. The dwarves had witnessed the weapon's power before. She was certain of it. Get ready to be surprised, God done, the old dwarf snickered as he brushed the weapon like he was caring for his own horse. Then, he pushed the knob inwards as the weapon purred. Gaia expected a fiery steel ball to shoot out of the weapon as it happened with the Death Kiss crossbows. On the contrary, nothing happened. The orcs growled, thinking the dwarves had fooled them. But suddenly, the orc behind the glistening shield roared in utter pain. Gaia was taken aback by the sheer volume of his cry. The big orc screamed like he was going through. Soon, all the others joined the orc in his cry. Blood seeped through their eyes, ears, and nostrils as they collapsed down. Gaia noticed the sound of their cries getting louder as God done turned the knob. What is happening? Calibra whispered to Gaia. No idea, Gaia shrugged. Their cries of agony lasted an entire minute until the orc gasped for air. Then, his big body hit the ground with a heavy thud. One by one, the entire group lost their breath and hit the ground with a sickening thud. Eerie silence swept across the hall. Even after they died, blood slowly drizzled out of every pore in their body. To this moment, Gaia had no idea how they died. This is unacceptable. How do we know they were not poisoned? The two other humans, besides the guardians, rose from his chair as though it was on fire and questioned the dwarves. Everyone had the same question in their minds. Why don't you stand there and get your answer? God done chuckled as though the human's question amused him. The golden-haired man's face turned red. He expected an answer with a more respectful tone, except he expected that from the wrong person. Dwarves were known for many things, but respectful was not one of them. Although Gaia didn't think the dwarves used some kind of underhanded tactics to kill them, she did want to see more. By more, she wanted someone else to get killed by the weapon. I will settle this. Surprisingly, the red orc stood up. As soon as the human saw the big, bad, and brute orc stand up, his mouth shut down instantly. The orc was big enough to cast a large shadow on the hall. Then, he turned his gaze toward one of his men. Go stand there and cast yourself a defense spell, said the orc. Hearing the orc, the others were stunned. No one in their right mind would agree to that, especially after witnessing how they suffered and cried. But the orc behind the red orc surprised Gaia by nodding his head. He strolled toward the bodies and waved his hand. Earth barrier. The orc cast the spell as a golem made out of stone appeared in a blink of an eye. The golem was at least 10 feet tall. It placed its hands before the orc to shield him from harm. Show us what you can do now, the red orc growled at the dwarves, who weirdly seemed excited rather than worried. Just like before, Godon fiddled with the knob as the weapon purred like a cat. This time, the weapon vibrated for a few moments. Everyone's gazes were fixed on the golem and the orc. To their shock, the stone golem cracked. Before they could realize what had just happened, the stone golem shattered into pieces as the orc started to roar in pain. Unlike the core strengthening stage people that died a few seconds ago, the orc was a soul refiner. Yet, the result was the same. The orc cried, collapsed to the ground, squirmed like a fish out of water, and suddenly, his cries stopped. However, the time it took the weapon to kill the orc was longer than before. We are satisfied with the weapon. The red orc didn't even flinch at his comrade's death. He acted as nothing had happened. Gaia was speechless. She realized the Empress wasn't kidding when she said this latest contraption could turn the tide of any war. Imagine what hundreds of these weapons could do. Furthermore, this was just a prototype. So only God knew how powerful the real weapon would be. Chapter 828 Noah is here. After witnessing the strange yet mind-blowing power of the weapon, the dwarves began the auction. The dwarves started the auction with the insane price of 20 billion gold coins. But none bat an eye at the price. Instead, the orcs raised the bid by 5 billion. Gaia was mind-blown to see how rich these orcs were. She was more curious about the orcs than before. But when she thought about what the weapon could do in a real battlefield, the price seemed fair or if not cheap. Even though Gaia had not more than 100,000 gold coins in her space ring, she raised the bid by another 5 billion just to participate in the auction. She knew the final bid would easily go to 100 billion gold coins. That kind of coin was not easy to get. Somehow, Gaia doubted a single individual could have such wealth. Even the Dark Lord Michael himself struggled to reach 1 billion gold coins in wealth. Of course, he would have easily reached that point if Noah hadn't banned the majestic alchemy chains and Hades. 30 billion, Calibra raised her hand and raised the bid casually. 50 billion, the Red Orc almost immediately raised the bid after Calibra. The Guardians remained silent, surprisingly. To this moment, they didn't open their mouths once. As seconds turned minutes, the blood around the dead bodies slowly evaporated into the air and nauseated the others. Clean that up, Goddun ordered the two dwarves behind him. The two short dwarves nodded as they ran toward the bodies while Bufug and Goddun continued the auction. With each bid, the dwarves smiled brighter. The auction was making them very rich. Gaia doubted the Empress didn't send anyone to buy the weapon for herself. It seemed to be the easiest way unless the dwarves had more than one weapon built, and they planned to sell each one separately. Gaia didn't even think about it. 65 billion, the golden-haired man who snapped at the dwarf earlier raised the bid. 70 billion, finally, the Guardian opened his mouth. Gaia was tempted to rob each and everyone in the room. They all could solve their financial problem in one go. Fortunately, Michael promised they wouldn't have to worry about gold coins after he returned from the demon's grave. But even if Gaia had billions of gold coins, she didn't think she would have bid for the weapon when she had the option to steal it. Enough of this, the Red Orc growled. 100 billion, Gaia Brown's arched up when the orc raised the bid by freaking 30 billion. Child's play, Calibra snickered. 150 billion, the orcs growled but restrained themselves from doing anything rash. Everyone in the room raised Gaia's suspicions. Among them, Gaia was almost certain that Calibra attended the auction on behalf of King Zelik, the Beast King. If that were the case, the orcs would have a difficult time outbidding the foxy woman because she had an entire nation behind her. For an orc who was heartless, the Red Orc was patient enough to keep himself calm. Although the dwarves were not terribly strong and lacked bodyguards, none of them dared to mess with the auction. They were all well-mannered. Calibra didn't seem like she would back down anytime soon. 180 billion, the Red Orc raised the bid. 200 billion, the Guardians raised the bid to 200 billion. Their bidding war continued for some time, with even Gaia occasionally raising the bid by 10 or 20 billion. Eventually, the Guardians and everyone backed off from the auction except Calibra and the Red Orc. The Beast Woman raised the price to 300 billion, and when the Red Orc was about to outbid her, the entire hall trembled slightly. For a moment, Gaia thought the dwarves had accidentally turned on the weapon. But no, the place trembled because of the Guardian airship. Gaia heard the sudden commotion outside as well as the strange whirring sound coming from above her. Her brain immediately recognized the sound. Guardians, Gaia's heart skipped a beat. My lady, the Guardians dash, Gaia heard the panicked voice of Arya when the ceiling above them exploded. Before anyone could react, several people clad in silver armor roped down through the hole in the ceiling. The explosion sent Gaia and the others stumbling away. Ceiling crumbled down as the silver-armored soldiers landed on the hull. Everyone was caught off guard. Don't move, one of the silver-armored soldiers shouted. Grgh, Gaia growled as she picked herself up. Calibra stood up, grabbing the wall for her support. Once the dwarves realized what just happened, Goddun tried to reach for the weapon. However, a silver-armored soldier dashed at the dwarf, grabbed him by the dwarf's collar, and threw him aside to the other end of the hall. Bastard! Bufug unsheathed his dagger and tried to cut open the soldier who threw away his partner. Rage blinded Bufug, preventing him from seeing the power gap between them. Each silver-armored soldier was at the soul-refining stage. Only the Red Orc was powerful enough to fight them beside Gaia. But she tried to formulate a plan to escape the auction with the weapon. Boom! The silver-armored soldier went flying onto the wall. Finally, the Red Orc walked out from the cloud of dust and threw away the soldier like he was nothing. With the orc's size and strength, the silver-armored soldiers stood no chance. At least that's what would have happened if the silver-armored soldiers were alone. Arg! The red orc roared. His shout alone had enough power to destroy the furniture and push everyone back. Bufug wasted no time as he rushed to the weapon. When the dwarf reached the weapon, Gaia thought he would use that to kill the silver-armored soldiers. However, she was surprised when the dwarf opened up the way they initially came from by pushing a button hidden on the floor. The floor was just a few seconds away from opening and letting the dwarf run away with the weapon. Poor dwarf didn't expect a light beam to strike him from above and throw him off balance. Gaia sensed a powerful being near her, and it wasn't the red orc who was just a few inches away from ripping off a silver-armored soldier's head. Another beam of pure white light struck the ground beside the red orc. The force knocked back the orc, saving the silver-armored soldier. Then, another figure slowly descended to the hall through the hole they blasted, covered in dazzling bright light. Gaia's heart pounded against her chest when she saw Noah Winston. As usual, he wore pure white robes, and his raven black hair fluttered in the wind. His eyes glimmered with calm and serenity. Since Noah was just as famous as the Dark Lord himself, everyone recognized him almost immediately. It had been some time since Gaia met Noah in person. Some kind of bad luck put Gaia in the same room as the Supreme Guardian himself. "Stand down, everyone," Noah's dominant voice swept across the hall. He completely ignored the red orc and announced, "We are here for the dwarves and the prototype." "Stand down, and this will be over before you know it," said Noah. He was just as calm as Gaia remembered him. That was one of the few traits Noah and Michael had in common. Both of them would remain calm in situations where most others would completely lose their minds. The red orc was far from listening to Noah and surrendering. Instead of backing off, the red orc made the mistake of thinking he could take on Noah since they were both at the fusion stage. A typical human at the fusion stage would lose the fight against the red orc, not Noah. He was anything but typical. With his big fists cupped, the red orc threw a punch, aiming for Noah's head. Noah waited till the last moment and blocked the red orc's fist with his palm. The ground beneath the orc cracked like an egg when Noah blocked his punch. Before the orc could retaliate, Noah twisted the orc's fist, pulled him closer, and punched him in the chest with enough force to send the red orc flying like a wooden dummy. The other orcs immediately ganged up on Noah and dashed at him from all directions. Noah reacted by stomping the ground with his right foot, creating a shock wave that knocked down the orcs off balance. Then, Noah simply raised his hand as a beam of bright light shot out from his palm and hit an orc right in the chest. "Ah!" The orc cried out in pain before losing consciousness. One by one, Noah knocked out every single orc before their leader could get back to his feet. For a big brute, the red orc was quick to get back to his feet. He simply brushed off the dust from his shoulder and cracked his big neck. "You are making a mistake, human," the red orc talked in his gruff voice. "You already made one," said Noah. "My lady, the Guardians has blocked all the exits. They got this whole place surrounded," Gaia heard Arya through the earpiece. "I still have the teleportation scroll. Don't worry about me. Get your team and get out of here," Gaia whispered. "But Dash, it's an order," Gaia interrupted Arya before she could finish her sentence. Meanwhile, the red orc prepared to battle Noah once again. But this time, he decided to use spells instead of brute force. The orc's eyes shimmered with a strange green glow, just like his veins. It didn't feel like the orc was using only celestial energy to Gaia. Something was amiss. Soon, a thick layer of emerald formed upon the orc, covering him like well-forged armor. The red orc moved toward Noah step by step. Each step he took shook the ground and made the ceiling more unstable. Gaia feared the theater might come falling down on their heads any second. But neither the orc nor Noah seemed to care about the building's structural integrity. "Grab the dwarves and secure the weapon and the bitters. I will deal with him," Noah said to his men. Unlike the orc, he didn't cast any spells or equip any armor. Instead, he waited for the orc to make his first move. Finally, the orc rushed at Noah with his fists raised high. "My lady, I don't think we can take the weapon anymore. Just please get out of there. We will figure something out later," Gaia heard Azazel. He was worried, and that wouldn't happen so often. If he was worried, Gaia could tell how bad her situation was. Chapter 829 The Power of Locking Out Cultivation. The red orc punched into his fist while cracking his neck. He was ready to give Noah a beatdown to death. Facing the big brute orc, Noah remained calm. He didn't even cast a spell. Instead, Noah waited for the red orc to arrive to him. "We are leaving," the golden-haired man tried to leave the hall, only to get halted by the silver-armored guardians. These soldiers surrounded everyone to interrogate them later. It would only take a second for Gaia to use the teleportation scroll to escape. However, he couldn't leave the place without finding the real weapon. Kidnapping the two dwarves seemed to be the only option at that moment. Except, the dwarves were already under the control of the silver-armored guardians. Gaia dared not to reveal her identity when Noah was right there in the room with her. Gaia waited for the right moment to strike. Meanwhile, the red orc almost reached Noah. When they had just a meter distance between them, the orc dashed at Noah with his fist aimed at Noah's head. Noah just moved his body to the side without moving his feet. The orc's fist brushed past his face, barely missing his nose by an inch. Then, Noah grabbed the orc's wrist, placed his hand on the orc's chest and boom, a bright beam of light shot out from Noah's palm, sending the orc flying yet again. This time, the orc crashed onto the wall, creating an orc-sized hole in it. Fumes radiated from the orc's chest as Noah's palm got imprinted on his chest. After the orc hit the wall, the entire hall trembled. "Stay down," Noah's voice swept across the hall. The red orc did the exact opposite of what just Noah said and got back to his feet. He clubbed his own chest like a pissed-off gorilla before running toward Noah with his eyes burning in rage and violence. Keeping his focus on the orc, Noah kicked a piece of stone crumbed down from the ceiling toward the orc. It was heavy as hell, and if a commoner tried to kick it, every bone in their feet would just snap like a twig. But when Noah kicked it, the stone piece flew like a football and hit the orc right in the head before the orc could defend himself. The orc was stunned for a few moments. Utilizing this opportunity, Noah dashed at the orc, leaped into the air, and kicked the orc with his knees. "Arg," the orc growled, stumbling backward. Noah hovered in the air and fired a strong beam of light that knocked down the orc to the ground. On the ground, the red orc struggled and growled in pain. Then, Noah landed straight down on the orc's chest, breaking a couple of the orc's ribs in the process. Although Noah and the orc were at the fusion stage, Noah was far stronger than the orc. He was a god, after all. Compared to Michael, Noah had a different path to godhood and possessed different powers. Still, as a god of light, the light beam coming through the hole above them strengthened Noah. Plus, Noah spent a nice chunk of his time honing his battle prowess. Noah stomped the orc with his knee, making the orc cough out blood. He punched the orc repeatedly until the orc's body radiated a glow from within. Suddenly, an explosion went off around the orc. The hall trembled once again as Gaia grabbed the pillar beside her to steady herself. Then, she noticed Noah crashing onto the rubble nearby. The red orc jumped back to his feet. To her surprise, the orc was on fire. He was literally on fire. However, the fire did not hurt the orc. Rather, the crimson red draped on the orc's skin like another set of armor. Before Noah could get back to his feet, the orc readied his hand, sending a stream of scorching hot flames. The curtains around them immediately caught on fire. Soon, the fire spread like wildfire, engulfing everything around them. On the other hand, a wall of ice appeared in front of Noah and protected him from the orc's fire. Ice and fire collided, creating a misty vapor around them. Coupled with the smoke, the mist made it impossible to see a thing in the room. Luckily, it worked in Gaia's favor. She closed her eyes, spreading her senses around. There they are, Gaia located the two dwarves. She sneaked toward the dwarves while Noah was occupied with the orc. You want the dwarves? Gaia's heart skipped a beat when she heard the orc's gruffy voice. She thought the orc was talking to her. But luckily, these words were meant for Noah. She hastened her steps, only to see another orc stumbling toward the two dwarves under the silver-armored soldier's hold. For some reason, her instincts screamed at her. Her legs moved without her control and leaped backward, putting some distance between herself and the dwarves. When she leaped away, she heard another explosion. Something splashed onto her face as she touched the drop of liquid trickling down her cheek. Blood. Gaia saw drops of blood on her hand. Gaia heard another scream that sounded as loud as a banshee's cry. It sounded like the human woman accompanied the golden-haired man. The Or who approached the dwarves, the explosion and the scream followed by it made Gaia question what just had happened. They are gone, the orc laughed like a devil. As soon as Noah heard the words, the wall of ice before him shattered. The icy shards flew in every direction, impaling wherever they came into contact. Then, a powerful gust of wind shot out of Noah, clearing the mist around them as well as swaying the flame until Noah reached the orc. Killing intent skyrocketed from Noah, seeing the bits of pieces of the dwarves and the silver-armored soldiers. Even the well-forged armor was broken into pieces by the orc, who self-exploded, killing the two dwarves. Noah knew the orcs were dangerous but never anticipated them to self-explode. Both Noah and Gaia were speechless. But Supreme Guardian, are we going to destroy the blueprints alone or the weapon too? Asked Neela. The silvered-armored soldiers focused on Noah, waiting for his answer. Instead of giving them a quick answer, Noah looked at the blue ocean through the window. He focused on the rhythmic waves to achieve a sense of peace both physically and mentally. Both. If we take this weapon, someone else will create a countermeasure. It would eventually lead them to build a more powerful weapon. Then another countermeasure and another more powerful weapon. Eventually, it will become a cycle until we have nothing but wars on our hands. It might sound dramatic in my imagination at this point, but I promise you, it will happen, Noah explained to Neela, paused for a moment, and continued. I don't think the Dark Lord will destroy the weapon. In fact, he will use it against us in a heartbeat, said Norvin, resting upon Noah's shoulder. Exactly my point. I am not him, and we won't use such a brutal killing machine against anyone, including the people in his army. They deserve punishment, not death, said Noah. Can I speak my mind, Supreme Guardian? Asked Neela. Noah nodded. He always allowed his team to speak freely and listened to them instead of outright shutting them down. Noah believed to be an effective team, communication was vital. When the final war with the Dark Lord arrives, people will die, Supreme Guardian. Both sides will suffer casualties. Deaths are inevitable. This weapon might be the edge we need against the Dark Lord. Wars are won by soldiers, not by weapons. If you believe in a weapon more than yourself, you need to reevaluate yourself, Noah said calmly about what he truly believed in. Before we leave, when are we going to address the elephant in the room? Norvin turned his gaze toward Noah. What? Asked Noah. We never talked about the Dark Lord knowing about the auction. We knew Valmos went missing, presumably dead, who had supposedly received an invitation to participate in the Han Torum auction. And we never found the invitation on his body. You and I both know Gaia written all over the dead bodies, said Norvin. If she killed them, there is a good chance she would attend the auction, Supreme Guardian. We can nab Saravar and the Dark Queen herself. 2 birds in 1 stone, Neela suggested, but Noah brushed it off with a smile. Just imagine what Ghost would do if we captured his love of life. Just imagine, Norvin closed his eyes for a moment and only saw death and destruction. Fear crept down Norvin's spine, just imagining the Dark Lord bringing his wrath as Noah said. Not to mention it's Gaia, we are talking about. If capturing her was that easy, Zanali and Nagaland would have done it by now. Until I am certain something could hold either of them, I am not going to risk trying to capture them. It has only led to death. This was the biggest reason why Andreas and Noah had such arguments lately. On the one hand, Noah believed it was not wise to try to capture the Dark Lord without finding a way to hold him down. On the other hand, Andreas argued that the more they leave the Dark Lord alone, the stronger he would become and the harder it would be to capture him later. In a sense, both of them were right. Even Skyhall was dumbstruck after Michael escaped the cage that was designed to keep him restrained. Not only did he escape, but he also killed Peter inside the very cage that Alicia put him in. Every time they tried to capture him, they ended up with more blood on their hands. Hence, Noah decided to let the Dark Lord be until he finds a way to stop him permanently. Enough talking. Let's go and finish the task at our hand. Noah waved his hands as he prepared to leave the room. When he talked about the Dark Lord and Gaia, he noticed a sliver of fear in everyone's eyes, including Norvin's. That fear was the Dark Lord's most powerful weapon, and Noah knew he must find a way to break this fear. As long as the people feared the Dark Lord, they would be easy to brainwash and swayed to the dark side. After leaving the safe house, Noah and his team used the dark alleyways to reach the sea without drawing much attention. As Noah stood on golden grains of sand, he looked up at the brilliant sky adorned with dazzling blue color and puffy clouds that formed different shapes in the sky. The goddess-like sun's face was being embraced by the demure navy fingertips of the skyline. The small crystals in the sand glimmered and twinkled brilliantly against the sun rays. Away from the immense sea, white foams from the waves gathered gently onto the golden shore. Every sight and sound stimulated a sense of composure and serenity. The effect was heightened by the absence of the noisy bustle of guardians complaining, rummaging of scrolls, and Andreas lectures, only to be exposed to the never-ending music of the waves and to breathe the fresh air instead of the stale atmosphere of his room. It was not easy to describe the effect of this sight, but it could only be strangely deciphered in his mind. His team was ordered to equip normal clothes instead of silver armor, which would most definitely draw attention from the dwarves. Eventually, Noah reached the ocean, where he saw a couple of dwarven kids building sand castles. The sight of children playing without a worry in the world warmed Noah's heart. Looking at them made him want to destroy the weapon even more. If the weapon fell into the wrong hands and they started to slaughter people with it, the blame would ultimately fall on the dwarves. It was not fair to blame all the dwarves for something a few dwarves filled with hatred had done. While Noah was drowned in the serenity of the beach and thoughts, one of the dwarven children noticed Noah. She waved at Noah, showing no hatred and hostility toward humans. This was the world Noah had been trying to create lately, a world without hatred and fear toward one another. In fact, he was more focused on solving disputes between races and helping commoners than dealing with the Dark Lord and his army. Noah waved back at the kid, which brightened the kid's face like someone had lit a candle inside her head. Then before the other kids could notice Noah, he disappeared into the ocean with his team. Instead of going to the shipyard on foot, they decided to go underwater. That way, the element of surprise would be on their side, and they could catch the dwarves before they alert Han Torum. Hammond and the weapons he helped the dwarves build were off-the-books operation. So even if the Guardian Guild infiltrated it and stole the weapon, Han Torum couldn't retaliate directly because such an operation doesn't exist officially. However, Noah planned to keep the guild out of the picture because the last thing he wanted was a cold war between the Guardian Guild and Han Torum. At this point, any conflict the Guardian Guild gets into would benefit the Dark Lord more than anything. Noah and his team were quick swimmers. They managed to reach the shipyard, which was built in the water, in a few minutes. But before emerging from the water, Noah closed his eyes, spreading his senses around the area to locate the dwarves in the shipyard. Having no idea a team of guardians was under them, the dwarves continued with their day-to-day work, which was building ships and a weapon of mass destruction. Then, he snapped his fingers, creating a quick flash of light. This flash was the signal. And the moment the team saw it, they raised their blowguns, blew into it, and sent a dart soaring through the air. Ouch! Blimey! One of the dwarves slapped his neck as he felt a sting. But there was something between his hand and neck. The dwarf pulled it out to see a tiny 10-inch arrow made of what seemed to be silver. In a blink of an eye, the serum kicked in as the dwarves rolled their eyes upwards before collapsing down. Move, Noah ordered the team as he leaped out of the water and dashed into the shipyard. Although the shipyard where the dwarves build secret weapons, they didn't put too many dwarves to guard. They believed too many guards would draw unwanted attention to the place. Hence, they had few guards, and they never opened their mouths about the underground facility, even when they were drunk. Their secrecy worked in Noah's favor. Inside the shipyard, he saw countless ship parts and giant chains hanging from the ceiling. Everywhere he turned, he saw nothing but metal, ship parts, wood, and empty mugs. Norvin leaped onto a chain above and looked around the shipyard to locate the underground passage. The dwarves might be drunk and hot-headed but not stupid enough to keep the weapon in plain sight. Norvin's eyes glistened like rubies as he used magical perception to see through the shipyard. Everything seemed normal and not out of place until his gaze fell on a golden train running down from a lever hidden behind a stack of wooden crates. There, Norvin pointed his finger at the wood crates as Noah and the team slowly sneaked toward it. Meanwhile, they noticed a couple of dwarves walking toward them. They fell down as fast as they entered the room. Noah turned and saw Neela with the blowgun. Her reaction was too fast to the point none of her teammates realized that she had just fired 2 blow darts. Noah gave a nod of approval before turning his gaze back to Norvin. "Knock out everyone and meet me down," said Noah. Since Norvin's true form was small and he could move around the shipyard without getting detected, Noah tasked Norvin with knocking out the dwarves. Even if he somehow got caught, the dwarves wouldn't connect this to the guardians. After all they saw was a monkey. Speaking of being a monkey, Norvin took out a brown pill from his space ring and tossed it into his mouth. As soon as the pill melted down, his golden fur turned mud brown. Without the shiny golden fur, he looked like a regular monkey. "Go ahead," Norvin whispered, turned around, and leaped toward the shipyard's left side, where they were building a frigate. "Follow me," Noah said to his team as they slowly sneaked toward the crates. When they reached the stack of crates neatly placed on top of each, Noah slightly moved the stacks. The wooden crates were surprisingly heavy, which made Noah wonder what was inside of them. The crates moved, making a creaking sound. Then the lever was exposed. However, it was not the typical lever that, when pulled down, would open a door. Instead, this lever made of thick, black metal had numerous tiny gears, nuts, and bolts. On top of that, there were 6 keyholes beside the lever. "Should we search those dwarves?" "They might have the keys," said Neela. Noah nodded as the team swiftly moved away from Noah to search the dwarves. A few minutes later, Neela and the others returned to Noah. Unfortunately, they came empty-handed. "We found no keys, Supreme Guardian." All they had was their swords and mugs. Neela creased her sword-sharp brows. They thought coming here empty-handed would disappoint Noah. On the contrary, he just smiled. Honestly, he expected the dwarves to have some kind of mechanism to protect the entrance. Otherwise, it would be too easy for anyone to enter their secret lair. Fortunately for him and unfortunately for the dwarves, Noah possessed a primordial flame. Neela's face brightened with the blue flames dancing above Noah's hands. No matter how many times they had witnessed the blue flames, they still had the same dumbfounded look on their faces when Noah conjured the flames for the zillionth time. The flame had a certain effect on the guardians. The heavenly flames had a radiant energy that made them calm, courageous, and fearless. Under their gazes, Noah moved the ball of heavenly flames toward the lever and let the heat creep into the keyholes. The metal slowly turned blue to the color of the flame. Inch by inch, the heavenly flames melted down the lock, and then, the lock clicked. Noah pushed open the door, revealing a dimly lit staircase that led to the dwarven secret lair. But the opening came with a catch. They weren't built with humans and long-legged species in mind. Instead, it was meant for the dwarves to use. Hence, the doorway was only 4 feet tall. Noah crouched down and entered the doorway, followed by his team. They were careful not to make any sounds until they could locate the weapon and the dwarves guarding it. After climbing down almost 50 steep steps, everyone, including Noah, felt a chill running down their spines. Hammond wasn't kidding when he said the weapon was massive in size. It was almost the size of a frigate. Compared to it, the prototype was just a baby. The weapon didn't even need to be powered up, but if someone simply blew into one end, the bell-shaped mouth would amplify the volume loud enough to kill several commoners. "Put on your masks," Noah ordered the team. He saw several dwarves and no way of knocking them out without getting caught. One by one, Noah's team put on a porcelain mask resembling the face of a mannequin. When they wore the masks, their ears grew a few inches outwards, making them look pointy and elven-like. Those who look at Noah's team would immediately believe they were elves wearing masks. The dwarves and elves hated each other for all reasons, and Noah didn't think adding one more to the pile wouldn't make much of a difference. Initially, he considered using black skull masks to portray themselves as the Dark Lord's army. But after thinking of the dwarves' nature of hot-headedness, he immediately removed that idea from his head. Because if the dwarves went against the Dark Lord, he would kill them, and he would reduce their entire clan to the ground without a shred of mercy. Noah slowly walked forward, stretching his arms and neck. "Stop what you're doing, you filthy animals," Noah's thunderous voice swept across the yard. He was quite good at the way elves would speak to the dwarves in a situation like this. The dwarves almost jumped from their feet when they heard the sudden voice. They immediately jumped down from the weapon, rushed out from the corners, and climbed down through the chains with their battle axes in hand. Bloody elves, the dwarves were more furious than they were shocked. Just the sight of pointy ears made their blood boil. The dwarves didn't even mind the huge cultivation gap between them. That was why the dwarves were often called hot-blooded and borderline stupid when it came to a battle. "Kill those fucking pointy-eared fucks," one of the dwarves raised his battle axe, crying out loud. "You're tuning into the Carefree Valley YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.